It was a warm fall evening. The last rays of sunlight illuminated the high school building. A slightly embarrassed Dayoung stood in the office, looking at her classmate confusedly. Sivu was embarrassed and blushing as he stood before her and confessed that he liked Dayon very much at first sight. Sivu explained to Dayon that as they talked, they grew closer, and he liked her more and more. Dayon stood in front of him, pondering the words she heard and didn't know what to say to her classmate. Sivu kept standing there thinking that she didn't like him, but hoping that Dayon would say what he wanted to hear. Out of sheer embarrassment and excitement, Dayon explained to Siv that she liked him too, while not offending him. Dayon kept saying he was jolly kind, and Sivu clenched his fists in embarrassment while listening to what she was saying. Standing in the office across from each other, Dayon continued to think about what to say to him and began to speak. In the schoolyard, teenagers were having fun. One played soccer, sat on the steps, and discussed something there, and his friend was waiting for him. When he saw his comrade, who was about to fall into despondency, he did not ask him how it went. Seeing Sivu's upset, he tried to cheer him up as much as possible. But Sivu realized that this conversation would never end. Sivu, almost crying, told his friend how the conversation went, and that Dayon said she wanted to go into paid study. A friend, realizing that Daejeon was far from being an excellent student and was just trying not to offend the guy, said it was possible to come up with a better excuse. Sivu started to say, "Why me?" At that moment, a ball flew into his head, accidentally kicked by the boys playing not far away from them. The guys started yelling at them, apologizing and asking if they were okay with their friend. Stopping the ball in front of his face with his hand, Sivu continued, "Why do I look like this?" Like himself, his friend didn't understand why his closest friend looked like that. After all, Sivu has been exercising for quite a while, watching her diet and counting calories constantly. They kept discussing how Sivu tries very hard to stay in shape and that if everyone tried so hard, there would be no more overweight people on Earth. Heading home from school, a friend asked if he had gone to the hospital, and Sivu replied that he had done so many times. Despite all the efforts to lose excess weight, it stands still, and most likely the matter is in genetics. Coming home upset, Sivu looked at the picture of his parents and thought it wasn't about genetics at all. Looking at the two pictures of himself and his parents standing side by side, Siva thought that if it were so, he would be slim, which would be great. After all, his mom was very beautifully slender and used to compliments on her looks. And his father, Siva, had never seen his father, only in pictures. Still, he knew that his father was a successful fighter of the spirit. Although his career was not long, Siva knew that his father was the best in the business. His records and the power of his strength are still remembered today. Going into the kitchen, on the table was a plate with salad and a note from my mom saying that my son should not give up and diet is good. Thinking about his mom's words as if he had this body type, Sivu realized that this one made him very angry. Not caring about his weight, Sivu will turn on the stove from the refrigerator, deliver a package of food, and begin to open it. Thinking he was about to eat, Siva opened the package but failed. At that moment, having failed to open the food, Sivu was already sitting at the table eating the salad his mother had prepared. Evening came and Sivu had run a distance of 4 kilometers, realizing that his pace was faster than usual. Remembering what Dayon had told him, Sivu ran even faster and said to himself that he would never give up on her. It was almost nightfall. Sivu had run 15.5 kilometers, breaking his record, and had stopped to catch his breath. Looking around, Sivu didn't realize where he was, as if this place had never been there, so he decided to look it up on a map. Taking out his phone, Sivu looked up. He saw an old man sitting on the edge of the bridge, telling him he was a hustler. The shadow fell over only half of the old man's face, and you could see that he had long, disheveled gray hair and an equally gray beard. Saying that he couldn't hide the blood, the old man abruptly jumped off the bridge and landed beside Sivu, who was standing below. Not understanding what was happening, Sivu thought about how he did it because the distance from the bridge to the ground was about 6 meters. He began to ask if the old man was okay. Sivu was frightened and started to back away, but immediately, the old man started saying that he was not after him and that there was no need to be afraid of him. The old man called himself Grandpa Babayam, who served as a judge and watched over the monsters on this peninsula. Grandfather Babai realized that Sivu did not know anything. He decided they would not talk for long and began pulling out something like a long tippet. It was so long that it easily reached Sivu, standing far away, and covered him from above. Entirely wrapped around him as if in chains, Sivu could not move his arms or legs and could only wait to see what would happen next. Sivu was already lying on the ground, and Grandfather Babai was standing there, his tippet magically returning to its owner. In the world where his grandfather Babai had taken him, there was a very beautiful sky. It was pink and purple, and several planets were visible on it. When Sivu got up from the ground, Grandpa Babai welcomed him to the monster world and told him to look around. Sivu did so and began to look. On almost every side stood huge monsters with large fangs. These were the inhabitants of this world. Grandfather Babai began to tell him the history of this world when people used to fear and worship them. But now they are spoken of as ghosts. Once every 666 years, they have a festival among all the monster families to determine the king, and only one talented candidate is chosen. One of the strongest ascended as king of this world, but 666 years have passed, and it is time to choose a new one. Sivu started rambling that even though he supposedly understood everything, he still couldn't accept why he was there, so he asked the old man. Grandfather Babai reenacted the story by saying that each tribe chooses a candidate. Sivu was the only one left to inherit goblin blood in the two worlds. He is a 4th or 5th generation goblin even though he is mixed. Terrified by everything happening, Sivu interrupted Grandfather Babai and told him he was deeply mistaken and had found the wrong man. It was only worth a word, and Sivu would see one of the monsters jump up with great speed and land right in front of him. Covering his face with his hands from the pieces of dirt and asphalt flying at him from the monster that landed near him, Sivu heard Grandpa Babai say that he had to take a test. When he looked up, he saw a giant creepy monster without eyes, standing before him, asking Grandpa Babai if everything was okay with this kid. And then Grandpa Babai said that if the big creepy monster wins, he can swallow this little man. Already tasting his victory, the monster thought he should not lose this opportunity to eat a human for the first time in a long time. As soon as he had finished speaking, he rushed over to Siv and kicked him so hard that the poor kid flew and slammed to the ground, which sold it. While he could not gather his strength to get up from the ground, Grandfather Babai began to say that even if he had inherited the blood of goblins, he could not participate in the festival. Grandfather Babai also said that if Sivu wants to survive, he will have a hard time and must first prove his worth to them. No sooner had Sivu recovered from the last blow than he felt the giant monster grab him by his hoodie and hurl him to the ground again with the same force. This monster was surprised at this little guy's persistence. He thought he was just a small piece of meat. Thinking he had nothing to lose, he stood over the lying Sivu, swung, and said that making a chop out of him would also be a lot of fun. And without any regrets, he began to fulfill his words, with a huge desire to swallow him and seal him into the ground. Sivu, not expecting such a thing, became as if stronger than his opponent, was able to lift his arm and remained unharmed. At this moment, the boy from school was no longer under the hand of this big monster, but a slender, muscular guy who did not realize his strength. Sivu felt so much strength in himself that he could do an uphill dash without expecting such a thing from himself. Sivu stood unconquered, accepting everything Grandfather Babai said, and feeling so strong that he was able to gain this victory, which ended the awakening. Returning to our heroes walking from school toward home, they entered the store. The friends chatted, and Sivu told them that that was the end of it, that it was just a delusional dream. The friend hoped he had a good time there, but Sivu assured him that it was no fun, that he was beaten all the time, and that he was able to make only one throw. They discussed that there was something strange about it, odd that he wasn't doing something familiar as he should in a dream, but he was being beaten. But the dream was so vivid that I kept saying to Sivu that it seemed I could repeat it now. A friend was telling him he was getting too caught up in it. But Sivu said he was so obsessed with his weight loss that his body became muscular even in his sleep. Going back to sleep, Siva remembered and looked at himself, for there he was, strong and pumped up. Suddenly he heard, "You came to your senses." Opening his eyes, Sivu saw Grandfather Babaya and an unfamiliar girl waiting for him to wake up. Sivu began to shake his head in panic, trying to come to his senses and realize that this was not a dream. Grandfather Babai did not expect such strength from Sivu and made sure that he still had the power of goblin blood in him. It had been a long time since he had seen a goblin serum. Grandfather Babai began to say, based on the testimony of many monsters around him, that this young lad was now a promising candidate. Grandpa Babai declared Choi Siwa a monster instead of a human being and said to spread the news throughout Busan. Everyone knew that to meet a goblin you have to try hard, and the festival would be very interesting, so monsters rushed to spread the news. Grandfather Babai told Siv that no one could touch him for no reason, and his name was on the list. Before he realized everything happening, he agreed with Grandpa Babai's Sivu, who said he had to go home. The girl was unflattering and said that Sivu was now a monster, and until he proved that he could hide his identity, he could not return to the human world. Sivu explained that he was the friendliest person and never got in trouble. Grandfather Babai became angry and said he had no choice but to destroy him. After the blow, Sivu flew 10 meters and landed on his feet as if he had just taken a leap. Seeing this, Grandfather Babai began to realize what kind of power he was talking about. He realized that now Sivu had the body of a monster instead of a human being. The goblin's abilities among the monsters were considered the best, even if this power had just awakened, assuring Siva that he could accidentally harm a person just by touching him. The guy wasn't willing to wait until 500 years had passed. This rule was imposed by the current king when he was elected, and Siv only had to wait half a year. Grandfather Babai began to tell an old story about how monsters were free to enter the human realm, and people were afraid and ran away from them. People relied on and worshipped the strongest monsters that lived among humans in hopes of their help. But with the arrival of the new king, everything changed. He introduced a law preventing people from hurting others, or even showing his face to them. Sivu kept hearing that the chosen king could rewrite the laws, and the moment all the monsters had been waiting for would come in the realm of men. Monster Night is when all the monsters rush towards the humans, awakening forgotten fear and terror in them. He needs to either wait things out or learn to control his power to do something about it, and Siva asked what would happen if he learned to control his power. Grandfather Babai wondered how strong he had to be for monsters to consider him his equal. Sivu stood confidently, and the old man asked him if he was up to something. Sivu replied that he wanted to make sure the monsters never touched humans. It became clear that the land would become dangerous, and Siv would have to protect his loved ones. Grandfather Babai said that all is not lost because goblin blood is powerful, and if Sivu learns to control his power, no monster will harm his loved ones. If Sivu wins the festival, he can continue to extend the law of not hurting people. Then, a young lady intervened in the conversation and said that Grandpa Babai was talking about the impossible, and Siva could not win the festival. Grandfather Babai suddenly remembered that he had not introduced the young lady. He introduced her as Seolwa. The girl will also participate in this festival. Seolwa asked why Grandfather Babai called her name, since they would not see each other again. Seolwa asked Shiwu if she understood correctly that he wanted to take the test to return to the humans, and if he backed out, she would be very angry. The grandfather explained to the boy that Seolwa was in the same situation as him and wanted to take the test to return to humans. Seolwa asked why she had to take this test when a bunch of monsters had spent 500 years hibernating among humans. Grandfather Babai replied that not exposing herself to people beyond basic skills requires self-control, and he doesn't realize how much she is ready for. Seolhwa understood but hoped it wasn't a stupid excuse not to deal with her. Leaving, Grandpa Babai said that if it were so, she wouldn't be here, and he was crazy busy. However, she was lucky. This is her chance since Choi Sivu is the man who will be the best judge. Grandfather Babai gave her until the end of the month to help Siv deal with her powers and learn the magic of transformation. Only when that happens will he allow them to live in the realm of humans. Leaving them both puzzled, he was about to leave the place when he heard it. Seolwa started yelling that it was bullshit, that she couldn't teach Shiva anything in a month, and that it would have been better if he just said, "We wouldn't give permission." Grandfather Babai turned around and said, "If it seems so, you better wait 6 months. Then it was up to her whether she would teach him or not. Saying that everything is possible, Grandfather Babai flew above the ground, opened his tippet, and disappeared with a massive flash in the sky. Seolwa asked Sivu if he knew what the power of monsters was. Sivu replied that he didn't, and then started telling him. At this moment, Sivu's eyes widened twice or even thrice as a giant monster appeared behind her. The monster appeared, called the girl Foxy, asked where the old man was, and clarified that the fight between the two was not over. Seolwa told him that people forgot about monsters because of people like him. After insulting her, the monster wanted to grab Seolwa, but he failed. Seolwa began to tell me that in this world, unlike the human world, the monsters are entirely different in size and strength. The difference is determined by the average potential and skills of each individual species, which is why classes appeared in this world. When the pureblood goblins disappeared, there was a debate over who was the strongest on the Korean peninsula. Many here will agree that these 9-tailed foxes are considered the strongest of the monsters on the Korean peninsula. All the scenes flash before his eyes. He no longer moans in pain. In his case, standing frozen in surprise was not an option. Sivu's situation requires acceptance and adaptation. While Sivu watched Xiaohua, she explained that magic is the ability to absorb and use energy and power to do something to a monster. Xiaohua went on to say that there were two types of magic, unique and acquired, and he assured that his blood remembered the unique magic. With unique magic, you don't have to learn much. You just have to get used to applying it. However, with the acquired one, it is much more complicated. Monsters can use it, but only if they are trained and have mastered it. Pointing at the bound monster behind her, Xiaohua said it hadn't been practiced, so she could easily use the binding spell. He is an example of a monster who is below her level but has agreed to train Siva. Xiaohua warned him that if he wasn't ready to go all the way, it was better to give up now because the road would be hard, and when he disappointed her, he would pay with his life. Sivu replied that he would either learn or die, for by all means, he must know. Xiaohua said that Sivu probably won't make it, but she'd better try to make it. Calling him to eat, Sivu asked if he had heard him, and his grandfather explained that magic absorbed the energy and power of the inhabitants of this world, but not him. Strength is gained from the air they breathe and the food they consume in the monster world, but Sivu has only just arrived in this world. With his human diet, Sivu cannot gain strength in the monster world, and Xiaohua suggested that after trying so hard, he must be hungry. Sivu wasn't expecting such an offer and said he wasn't hungry. A tremor appeared in his hands, and his veins began burning bright purple. This was the magic in his blood. Xiaohua explained to him that his strength was almost at an end due to the recent mess. That usually happens with strength, but Xiaohua knew the solution to this problem. Pointing at the monster, Xiaohua said that there was a rule that if the judge declared a winner, then the rights to life and death were in the hands of the winner. Following this, Sivu can eat the monster and absorb its powers. After all, it's the fastest way to get full quickly with such a large size. Instinctively, Sivu went forward for the first time, feeling the demonic hunger that fueled the whispers of the nine-tailed fox. Sivu stood in front of the nine-tailed fox in his head, feeling the power over the predator. But Xiaohua didn't tell him everything. Goblin nature always wants to catch bigger and tastier prey. Sivu immediately threw himself at Xiaohua, thinking he would defeat and devour her. But in return, she received a binding spell to subdue the nine-tailed fox. Xiaohua thought you shouldn't have done that, no matter how hungry you were, and her magic began to change Sivu's body. She says she's sick of monsters like Sivu, who think they can defeat and consume her. He thought she was easy prey for him, but at this time, the chains had already fully restrained Sivu's body. Saying she would teach him good manners, she saw the chains begin to break. I was not expecting such strength from him, and the thought flashed through my mind that it just broke one from the force of his hand. Despite her doubts, Sivu broke all the chains and freed himself from his shackles with ease. Recognizing that Sivu was a goblin, Xiaohua decided to use a different method, even though he was a half-goblin. While Sivu flew towards her to strike, Xiaohua invoked the blessed Great Demon King. A huge red hand appeared in the sky, and lightning struck Siva with its fist. The next blow, delivered with the palm of his hand, was so decisive that the ground shook and Sivu was literally sealed into it. After seeing that Sivu was still alive, Xiaohua said that he had asked for punishment when he attacked her. Xiaohua didn't expect Sivu to do that because he was just awakening and shouldn't have that much fortitude and strength. After all, among the powerful goblins who had been hit with such a powerful and rare force remained alive. Tearing off the horn that grew from his horn after the strike, Sivu didn't even think he had the potential to become a symbol of the goblin race. Looking at that, Xiaohua said that for an unfinished goblin, Sivu wasn't bad enough. Without realizing it, Sivu had made a goblin baton out of a torn-off horn thanks to a unique magic. Xiaohua was an outstanding monster who had gotten 9 tails before reaching the age of 100 years. The talent that Xiaohua inherited had been passed down in the demon fox family for 1,000 years. Because of this, Xiaohua realized how dangerous the goblin baton was without even a slave seeing it. Xiaohua realized that in terms of monster power, she certainly wouldn't lose, but she felt a certain pressure. Sivu attacked Xiaohua again, transforming the baton and trying to deliver a crushing blow to her. After hitting each other, there was as if an explosion of light flashed and illuminated everything around. As the Demon King's hand restrained the power of the blow, Xiaohua realized how the goblin baton felt. Without realizing what Xiaohua Xiwu had said, he flew to deliver a crushing blow to his opponent. Accepting this challenge, Xiaohua realized she needed to show what she could do. And a mad scramble ensued, with Xiaohua thinking she would be the winner. Realizing that these blows are not enough, you need to hit him at least 5 or even 6 more times. Seolhwa continued to deliver merciless blows to Sivu, hoping he would come to his senses. But Sivu continued to fight despite the blows, for he had the power of the goblins in him. Seolhwa couldn't believe that Sivu could fight against the king of monsters even if it was his hand. Legend has it that the tool changes shape according to the will and desire of the owner, so goblins in the past lived and prospered. The monsters believed that the dove baton was a weapon that could be anything. Seolhwa realized that the way of attack had changed that she couldn't control. Also, Seolhwa realized that this weapon's ratio of magic price to combat power was ridiculous. Seolhwa decided to use the Demon King's deception instead of brute force. The fight continued, and Seolhwa attacked while Sivu countered her strength. Seolhwa didn't understand how he was still holding on, for those who had lived 100 or 200 years could not compare to Sivu in strength and power. Thinking as the half-breed opened his eyes a few minutes ago already on this level, Seolhwa realized why the goblins were so good. Seolhwa realized that Shivu's magic had already reached its limit and his body might tear apart. With that, Seolhwa decided to use the five-tail kick. The furious Sivu was already flying at Seolhwa, trying to strike with his crushing club. Seolhwa knew that an enemy with such strength could be considered a worthy opponent, despite this being his first time. Here came the great Demon King whom Seolhwa had summoned to deceive. At the moment of battle, the Demon King struck the first blow, which consisted of 6 cuts, and Sivu collapsed to the ground without strength, leaving a significant mark on the ground. But Seolhwa was too late. Sivu was lying on the ground screaming in pain as he collapsed from magical exhaustion. Standing on Shivu's body, Seolhwa said that it was on his conscience because he didn't know his place and couldn't stop when his body started to fail. Seolhwa was angry. Realizing that Grandfather Babai would be scolded a lot, she turned around when she heard Shivu's voice. Looked at Siva lying on the ground with eyes full of tears, calling for his mom. He decided to help Siv and used magic to lift him off the ground. Seolhwa kissed Shiva because he could have gone to the next world, which was unfavorable for her. After the kiss, Sivu collapsed to the ground like a sack of coal. Silva stood over the lying Sivu and said he would get serious if he didn't live up to expectations. Sivu woke up already in one room. He jumped up and stayed sitting on the bed, trying to come to his senses. Started looking around and trying to figure out where he was now. The door creaked open, and Sivu turned to see who was coming through the door. Seolhwa entered the room carrying a tray with a cup of drink in her hands. She glared at Siva, sitting on the bed, remembering everything that had happened. Sivu looked at Seolhwa and smiled. He understood and remembered what had happened. Said he was so sorry because he knew what he'd done. He couldn't control his body, and even though he wanted to help, Seolhwa was endangered because of it. After listening to Shiva, Seolhwa pointed to the cup with the drink and told him to drink it. Siva thanked him for the drink, taking the cup in his hands, thinking it was some kind of traditional medicine. Shivu took a sip and wrinkled his nose like a dried plum, but Seolhwa said that if he didn't swallow, she would kill him. Shivu asked what the drink was made of, and Seolhwa replied that it was information that wouldn't help finish the drink. Squirming, Shivu tried to finish his drink. At this point, Seolhwa said that she wouldn't pity him, and that she should listen carefully. Seolhwa explained that Shivu had forgotten about the big horned goblin that had fled while they were fighting. This goblin rightfully belongs to Siv and is probably hidden somewhere for 100 years because he knows how things will be when he is caught. Sivu choked up as he listened, knowing that he had missed out on prey perfect for snacking on a half-breed like him. Not thrilled to hear this, Sivu asked Seolhwa for another way to eat. Seolhwa replied that he was wrong to think he was human, and that he would never be strong if he wasn't willing to hurt others. Finally, Siva said he hadn't realized he would have to destroy and eat monsters. Sivu said that to him, they were dangerous monsters threatening people, and if he did everything wrong, people would get hurt in a few months. Sivu continued that he would do his best to protect the people, and if necessary, fight and eat them. Looking at Seolhwa, Sivu kept saying he wasn't asking because he didn't want to eat them, but in case there were other options. Seolhwa said the most effective way is to eat other monsters, and maybe that's in a duel where both opponents agree. The weak are caught and eaten, and Sivu will no longer have easy prey, Seolhwa said. Many monsters have seen that Sivu wields spirit and have spread around, and those he can defeat will not agree to fight. On the contrary, other more vigorous opponents will come after you, Seolhwa continued. But if you lost a big one, catch yourself another smaller prey, suggested Seolhwa. An excited Seolhwa stood up and called after her, saying she had a gift for Sivu. Sivu followed Seolhwa, and when they got outside, Sivu wondered where his gift was. Ahead of him, Sivu saw Seolhwa and a giant monster sitting behind her, bound in chains. Shivu was amazed at such a gift and asked Seolhwa if it was a monster. Seolhwa said yes and no. Technically, he lost the right to be called a monster because many people lose their minds and give in to their instincts, just like Seolhwa said on TV. Shivu listened intently as Seolhwa told him that not many people were as lucky as he was, and these beasts, as they called them, did something unique. Such beasts are stripped of all monster rights. This beast was a jerkbug, which they were called on the Korean peninsula. Seolhwa continued that this monster had lost his mind and needed to be fought. The chains flew off, and the jerk-off punched Siv, but he easily bounced back. Watching the fight, Seolhwa thought Shivu didn't freeze in confusion, but used his body better than expected. But it seemed to Seolhwa that Sivu was simply trying to delay the moment of the fight as long as possible. Sivu's enemy came from a family of fire dogs who earned a bad name and wanted to represent the family at the festival, but were accused of eating other monsters. The monster surpassed its limit and went insane, unable to cope with the force, continued Seolhwa's story. The fight continued, with the rivals throwing blow after blow in hopes of gaining the upper hand. Seolhwa watched and thought that Shivu couldn't consciously use a club and would most likely not be able to prevail. Sivu's opponent was insane, but a level higher in strength, and some of the spirit won't work on an opponent who emphasizes wrestling. Seolhwa had already planned to awaken in him the instinct that awakens on the brink of death, though it was cruel. Seolhwa saw Shivu give the beast the strongest and most accurate blow on the head. After all, Siva is in the human world in boxing training, and the trainer always praises him for his endurance. The coach said Sivu had talent and wanted to help him lose the extra weight to compete. Unlike the others, Sivu's goal was weight loss rather than physical strength or fighting ability, but it never happened. Sivu did not give up and practiced many martial arts that helped him in battles. Through innate talent plus sheer effort, Sivu absorbed all the martial arts skills he had studied. From the blow that Shiwu struck, the defeated monster collapsed so that even Seolhwa was puzzled. Sivu stood there rejoicing in his victory and asked Seolhwa how he could eat this monster now. Looking at the defeated beast, Sivu couldn't believe that he was able to put down the giant monster. Watching them from the rooftops, Seolhwa hoped that these techniques were not innate strength and would not work against the strength and bodies of monsters. But Seolhwa was glad that Shivu could figure things out and use his skills in a serious fight. Sivu wondered to Seolhwa if he needed to eat him completely since victory had been won. Seolhwa smiled and offered to discuss it when the fight ended. The monster rose from the ground, grabbed Siva's shoulder with its teeth, and wired him a few meters away. Seeing his shoulder, Sivu cried out in terror because the wound was too deep, and immediately the monster attacked again. Seolhwa was sure there would be plenty of time after Shivu answered him. The main reason a monster is different from a human is not pain, but fear from rubbing limbs. It's inherent in humans to feel fear, so 17-year-old Sivu has a panic attack. Sivu noticed that the wound on his shoulder was beginning to heal, but the monster attacked again and cut Sivu's sternum. However, the wounds all healed because humans and monsters have many differences. Still, the main ones were stamina and body recovery. That meant unless you left this world or were severely injured, mutilation meant nothing. And that's when you realize that the restrictions hurt less and physical ability and strength increase. Realizing this, Sivu gave his opponent a crushing blow, sending him flying back 50 meters. Sivu stood there, thinking that his arm hurt so much that it felt like it was going to break, but he also realized that his punches had gotten much stronger. He realized that he wouldn't be surprised by body recovery anymore. He was not the only one. Seolhwa went down to Shivu and said that the monster certainly won't go to the other world, but won't recover quickly. He also asked Sivu how he felt after using magic for the first time in a conscious state. Shivu was shocked at the use of magic because he hadn't done anything, and Seolhwa replied that magic is used differently. Realizing that the body had recovered due to magic, Seolhwa said the blow was also the result of magic and physical strength. Seolhwa asked if Shivu had felt anything else, and Shivu replied that it was something like a static current. She explained that if Sivu wasn't lying, it was magic, and since he was inexperienced, he couldn't feel it accurately. Seolhwa explained to Shiv that he had fought just for experience since he had subconsciously used magic to win the fight. He was also complimented that Sivu was talented enough to make him shy and scratch his head. With the words that it was time to end, Seolhwa used magic to lift the lying monster and called it closer to her. Clarifying that Shivu had never dealt with a living creature before, Seolhwa said it had to be done in one blow, or the monster would lash out. Told Siv that the weakest place where most monsters store magic is above their navel. Seolwa continued and told Shiwoo to put his magic into one punch, to which Shiwoo exhaled and replied that it was hard the first time. Few people will doubt when you gain weight, so Sivu remembered his past life, gathered all his strength into a fist, added magic to it, and struck a decisive blow. Seolwa asked Shivu if he had grabbed something in his fist when he made the punch and asked him to open his palm. When Shivu did so, he saw a purple pearl. Seolwa explained that it was cinnabar and that it had to be swallowed in order to gain magic. He swallowed the pearl, but Sivu didn't feel a thing. Like something's going to happen as you swallow, and then a blackbird landed on Siva's shoulder. Frightened by the bird, Sivu started screaming and flailing around, trying to throw it off of him. Scaring the bird away, she turned into a girl who was already standing in front of them. Seolwa recognized the girl and asked her why she had flown here, since they had no business together. The girl replied that friends don't need a reason to meet. She introduced herself as a childhood friend of Seolwa's called Seol-mi. She was excited to meet the goblin everyone was talking about. Shivu also introduced himself, but Seolwa wasn't too happy and asked what the big deal was. Seol-mi said she was working with Grandpa Babayam, and she came to give the award instead for catching 2 monsters. But Seolwa asked to give the award to Shiv as he deserved it. As Seol-mi replied, she marveled at Sivu's abilities and couldn't believe he was a human just a short while ago as she watched him. Seol-mi kept saying that they might be rivals at the festivals, but in response, Seolwa laughed and said that Shiwu would be screwed at the festival. Looking at Siwa with admiration, Seol-mi said he had potential and could win, and gave Siv the choice of a chance to go home right now or a chance to get stronger. It didn't take long for the choice to be made, and we were back in the human world by middle school. Yushin, Siva's best friend, talked to him and asked him what was wrong because he didn't show up at school or answer his phone. Siv wanted to lie that everything was fine, but wouldn't deceive his friend. Sivu thought he asked his friend for help because only Yushin could help. After listening carefully to everything Sivu said, Yushin couldn't believe it. He started yelling and asking where he was now. Sivu tried to justify himself and said his mom would go crazy that he had been gone for a month. He asked me to tell his mom that he was working out and losing weight at the Yushin Family Training Center. As the conversation continued, Sivu said that he understood because it sounded nonsense and thought Yushin would not be very comfortable with it. But there was no choice, and Yushin agreed, but he asked him to tell everything, even if he supposedly wouldn't believe it because he could help him. But then Seol-mi appeared and told him to lie. It was against the rules to tell anyone about the existence of monsters, and they would be punished for it. The friends agreed, and Yushin told them to call if Siv needed his help. Yushin disconnected the call and realized that Sivu had probably lied to him. Sivu exhaled because he hadn't broken any rules, but he had to lie to his best friend. Returning to the selection point, Sivu said it's impossible to be transported to the human world before taking the test, but that's not true. Seolwa wasn't satisfied because Seol-mi told her she could move it. But Sivu disagreed, deciding to leave a month after passing the test about this. Seol-mi was at a loss. Sivu said he needed to learn because something much worse than being unable to go home could happen. So Sivu decided to stay and increase his strength and monster abilities because the last fight convinced him of that. Interrupting him, Seol-mi said that it sounded so cool, like he was the main character in a movie. Seeing this, Seol-hwa was angry because Seol-mi was teasing them with a choice that didn't exist, and she was sure it couldn't be a reward. Said that it was Seol-mi's bad habit to lead everyone around and evaluate their behavior. Seol-mi explained that it's a kind of test to understand people's personalities and moods through questions like this. She also clarified the book she gave last time, but Sivu thought about it as if he knew Seol-mi because she was different from the other monsters. Seol-mi made this book for Seolwa to learn the basics of becoming human, but she only read a couple of pages. Seol-mi thought of taking Siwa somewhere and asked Seolwu about it. She was fine with it. Starting to transform, Seol-mi's hands began to be covered in feathers like birds. One flap, and in front of them was a blackbird instead of a cute girl. It turned out that it could move between worlds and could move monsters. Saying that Seol-mi would be back soon, Seol-mi grabbed Siwa, flapped her wings, and flew away. In a world of people, Siwu thanked Seol-mi for the phone, and she asked if one call would be enough and if he would like to see his family. Siwu replied that he only has his mom, who is now on business trips. Otherwise, there would have been a scandal. As a thank you for the opportunity to call a friend, Sivu offered to order dinner, and Seol-mi agreed. Since her first visit to the human world, Seol-mi had wanted to try homemade food. After a while, Sivu set the table from what was at home and asked if she was sure she would like that. As they sat at the table, Seol-mi thanked her for the food and said they had to buy or eat at school. Seolmi said she goes to Hojun High School, and Siwoo said it's near his school. As they continued eating, Seolmi mentioned that she didn't have any friends who could buy her lunch, while Shiv seemed to have a lot of friends. After thanking her for the delicious food, Seolmi handed over the award she spoke of earlier. It was a scroll called Monster Inventory. Seolmi explained that it was like a bag and phone for monsters. It can be freely summoned, and the scroll can show whatever you want to show just by swiping your finger, like on a phone. Seolmi took out a box from the scroll, saying you can store things in it and take them whenever you want. Taking out a box from the scroll, Seolmi gave it to Siv and added that he would quickly figure out how to use it. In the box were coins, some inventory, and clothes to put on your arm. Seolmi started explaining that some coins called goblin faces were in the middle of the inventory on the left. These coins are highly valued in the monster world, and the amount gifted to him is quite large. And on the right was a goblin treasure that would gain different abilities if you infused your power into it. Grandfather Babai personally packed everything. Seolmi said he had big plans for Siva because they only gave coins for such a victory. These plans were for an award at the festival, said Seolmi, and that monsters have a concept of homeland. Suppose the monster from the Korean peninsula becomes the king. In that case, it will be great because he almost became the king at the last festival. The bout with the king was equal, continued Seolmi, but it didn't work out. The most interesting thing is that it was a goblin like Siwoo, only many times stronger, and no one matched him in strength on the Korean peninsula. Looking at this treasure, Siwoo said he didn't realize he was a monster and still couldn't believe what was happening. But Seolmi said he adapted, settled in quickly, and made a significant impression on her. As she continued talking, she mentioned that Siwoo feared that monsters would threaten humans. And if that's the case, Seolmi needs to become king and extend the current law. Seolmi said that Siwoo was her first friend. He can ask any questions and she will try to answer them. Trying to ask a question about the jerkin, Siwoo turned his attention to the scroll next to Seolmi. A red inscription appeared on the scroll and began to blink. All monsters hear this when something bad happens. Seolmi said if a call goes through to the human world, it means that someone hurt a human, thus breaking the rules. Seolmi said there can't be an emergency call since this hasn't happened in decades. Then Seolmi grabbed her head and screamed, but she realized it was serious. With a single click, she vanished, leaving behind a falling scroll and Siva, who didn't understand a thing. Since Seolmi had disappeared, Siwoo took the scroll with that artifact and slipped his hand into it. I took the armband out of the scroll and put it on, wondering how to wear it always or use it as armor. It was already 96 on the clock, and Siwoo remembered that Seolmi had said to be back before 10. Standing in his room, Siwoo worried about Seolmi and thought he'd better get her phone number. Looking at the picture of his family, Siwoo thought that if he had goblin blood in him, it was probably all from his father. After all, the first time he met grandfather Babayam, he had mentioned generations, and Siv wondered if his father knew he was a goblin. Some sounds were coming from the window, and Siwoo turned around. He didn't see anyone, so he thought it was Seolmi. The streets of the city were much darker, and in one of the alleys, a certain guy was being strangled by a giant black monster. He was all black, with huge glowing teeth, and around his neck he had what looked like a bright purple chain. A flash of light appeared in the sky, followed by a beam that cut through space as if from nowhere. Thus came Seolmi, who addressed the monster and wailed about catching it without end. The beam piercing the space turned out to be a feather she had thrown, and Seolmi thought that this way there wouldn't be any feathers left for her. The monster turned around and asked what Seolmi was worried about, if it was the loss of feathers. Standing against the monster, she asked him if it was true that he felt no pain. At this moment, the monster let go of the guy and quickly disappeared into the city streets. And the poor guy was left sitting there, trembling with fear, afraid to move or say anything. Seolmi clamped the wound of that guy's friend and told him not to worry because the ambulance was on its way, and she put ointment on the wound. And the monster, at this very moment, was sitting on the roof watching her actions. And when Seolmi noticed it, the monster jumped on top of her, hoping to strike. But she was stopped by a guy who asked Seolmi to keep her head up so that her shadow wouldn't beat her, because that would be pretty embarrassing. Overjoyed at his appearance, Seolmi called him Oppa and knew he would be at her side. The guy who showed up was not thrilled with the way she called him, and in response, he heard that she could just call him by his first name, which was Goyu. As Goya began to cast the spell, he asked to be called more politely, but he heard something like that and waved his hand. Using hypnosis, he suggested to the guy that he and his friend were hit by a car in an alley and asked him not to be afraid, but to wait for the ambulance to arrive. Seolmi correctly told Goyu that this magic is not hostile and that it is hard to learn, She tried to learn it, but failed. In response, Goyu asked Seolmi how many she had caught, thinking she was ahead of him in the number of monsters she had seen. Answering, Seolmi gave the number 24 and said there wasn't a single normal monster among them. She went on to say that all the monsters are controlled by someone since they have consumed 7 and maimed many. Goyu replied that they liked the massacre because everyone knew what a serious crime it was, and only those who wanted it would go for it. Then Seolmi asked Goya if this was all for some kind of outlet. Goyu began to tell me that goblins used to devour humans because they were beneficial food for monsters. But Seolmi couldn't believe it because few knew about it. She realized that eating people could easily become powerful. If everyone in the human world knew about it, it wouldn't be so peaceful. Goyu explained that not everyone would bother taking such a difficult test, only weirdos like the two. But the festival is approaching and all the monsters are power-hungry and willing to take that risk. But Goyu thought Seolmi must have known about it since she was helping Grandpa Babai. Seolmi continued to argue that someone who does this is a massive coward. Goyu replied that one should summon monsters by the hundreds instead of personal interference. Before Seolmi could finish her thought, she asked Goya to clean up and flew away, leaving only feathers behind. Sivu stood on the balcony and didn't realize the wound had been closed minutes ago. And behind his back, a shadow was already creeping up on him, and he thought it was much simpler. The shadow monster attacked Siva, but the tat dodged the blow and used Goblin Serum. Reflecting on the blow, Sivu didn't realize what had happened, but thinking that beating him with the same tactics wouldn't work, he struck back. Sivu thought that he would have been sewn up right now if it wasn't for that feeling, like before the jerky swallow attack. Looking at the monster that flew over from the impact, knocking down the railing, Siva thought it was fortunate that no one was hit. The monster stood up from the blow, grabbed his tail by the throat, and told Siv that he had put down all the people in the area so they wouldn't get in their way. The monster asked Sivu if he was the goblin everyone was discussing. Immediately squeezing Siva harder, he flew up and threw him over himself. Sivu landed on his back after flying many meters, and the monster jokingly said he didn't mean to throw him that far. The monster stood and pondered whether or not the floor had weakened after the impact, but was sure the rent would drop afterward. When Sivu got up, the monster told him it would be great if he broke after the first hit. The monster looked at Siva and told him that he was just adding to the trouble by resisting. Standing before the monster, Sivu realized he was facing incredible danger. Continuing to speak, the monster asked Sivu if he would give him a chance or let him just eat him, and asked him not to look at him so closely. After all, they have a huge class difference, and Sivu will be tormented with more pain or just leave this world painlessly. Holding up a picture of Sivu's mom, the monster said he wasn't promising not to eat his mom later. Hearing this, Siv's strength awoke and he struck the monster with a mighty blow. After that, Sivu tried to grab the monster, but a strong tremor appeared in his hands. With his mom, he was just a provocation, said Monster, and used unique magic. Sivu continued to shiver and listened. It was magic poison, but he had to think of something to touch it himself and apply it. The poison had already begun to spread through Sivu's blood, and he could no longer muster all his strength as if he were paralyzed. If only Sivu had known how to use the thing on his arm, everything might have been different, said the monster. The weak remained to be victims. He became a giant snake, prepared to attack, and said he would remember him. But Sivu thought he could only make one move at this point. The snake had already opened its mouth and quickly crawled towards Siv to swallow him. But gathering all his strength, he still managed to make one movement and responded with a precise and strong blow, which caused the monster to fall to the ground. The monster didn't expect this and realized that he almost went to the next world. In a frenzy, he jumped up and used magic to hit back. Sivu pressed into the ground, shivering, and lay motionless. The monster could not understand why he was able to strike when the poison was already in his blood, and really, goblins are strong. The snake noticed 2 blades sticking out of her body and couldn't figure out how they got that way. Then a man in a red mask appeared and said he was the storm's ancestor who heads the Ministry of Thunder and lives above the 9 heavens. With a single word from him, the swords glowed and the snake seemed to be struck by hundreds of discharges of thunder. Approaching Siv, the masked man asked what they were doing there. The blades fell from the transforming snake's body, and the monster asked to retrieve these useless weapons. The wounded and bleeding monster wondered what had caught up with him and how he had gotten there so quickly. The monster realized this man was hazardous and on another level compared to the others. Realizing that he couldn't slow down and wouldn't defeat him even if he resurrected, he bled out his own blood, and another stronger monster appeared, and offered to have fun because the other monster had a divine class body. With a shout that he needed to finish his meal, the monster rushed toward Sivu. But the masked man repelled his attempt to feed on himself or Siva. After dealing with one, the masked man flew after the monster, which turned into a snake and pierced its head. Standing in front of Sivu, the man said he had better answer the questions if he wanted to stay alive, as he realized Sivu was not with them. Sivu couldn't believe it because he heard the voice of his friend from the human world and asked if he recognized his voice. The man who took off the mask turned out to be Sivu's best friend, Yushin. He couldn't believe his eyes when he saw his friend standing in front of him. Yushin said Sivu looked bad, and the latter replied that it was a long story. Yushin didn't even want to ask why he didn't look the same. And Sivu stood there saying he couldn't breathe because the poison had long since spread through his blood. Yushin said it's not a simple poison, it's an ability, and the drugs he has with him won't help. But then Yushin noticed that the poison in Sivu's blood began to leave, and he realized that it was body regeneration. Hearing a noise, they turned around and saw the monster bleeding and running away. Yushin sat bowing his head, and Sivu asked if he was okay, to which Yushin replied that it was impossible. He continued that he hadn't known for 3 years that his best friend was half goblin, and by now, Sivu had fully recovered. Lowering his head, Yushin said that his father would have ridiculed him for not noticing that his friend was a monster. Sivu noticed that Yushin had never said what martial arts his family had studied. He told me that it was his family's duty to train and destroy supernatural beings, and there were only 6 months left. Yushin replied that monsters have infiltrated the human world, but it has been rare in the last 100 years. He asked him how long ago it started. Yushin explained that monsters who want to become kings eat people because it's a source of power for them. And a month ago, the number of missing people increased in the big cities. However, there is no direct evidence that monsters are doing it. However, the first monsters show themselves as explicitly as they do now. Suddenly, Yushin felt something, and a white light appeared near his friends. Solmi landed, asked if Sivu was all right, and apologized for her absence. But Yushin intervened and said he would protect himself and Siva if he thought she attacked them. Sivu tried to stop it, but Yushin knew it wasn't human. He said monsters understand the rules, so he didn't finish her off right away. Yushin continued to stand his ground, and said that he was not normal for believing that after the test, he could live in the human world. Even though they look like humans, they are monsters who lust for power and eat each other and humans. And as long as Sivu is human, despite the mixed blood, his home is in the human world, and for that, permission from the monsters is not needed. Yushin said he wouldn't let him go back, and he didn't have to become a full-fledged monster to stay home. Seolmi realized it was all a complete nightmare for Siwu, but he was already in the monster world enlisted. Because of this, breaking the rules will have consequences, and both Sivu himself and his shaman friend will suffer. Seolmi had already considered running away with Siwu but was afraid, so she said that as his guardian, she would take him with her. But Yushin stood his ground that he would hurt her if he ignored the warning. And Sivu kicked Yushin and grabbed his sword, asking if the engraving meant anything. A distraught Yushin wondered if his friend was under hypnosis or bewitched. Shivu began to say that such a term applied to Yushina and himself because he had already absorbed one monster to protect himself and others. He wasn't going to stop, and he didn't want to hurt people, but he agreed to consume monsters to become stronger. Interrupting, Yushin said he didn't need to go that far and didn't have the strength to protect Siva and his mom in 6 months. Throwing Yushin's sword from his hands, Sivu said that no matter what, he would become the king of monsters. Yushin replied that he was crazy and didn't know what it meant, but Sivu said he did and would risk the world's existence as it had before. It's better to do something than to stand by and let him try it without knowing if it will work or not. Yushin understood his friend and said that if his thoughts were pure, there was no need to prove them by force. And if Sivu, being a monster, crosses the line, then I will have to destroy him without hesitation and put the sword in the scabbard. Sivu replied that this was the way to go, and if Yushin decided it was deserved, let him choose how to end it himself. Taking the mask, Yushin asked the girl her name. She said her name was Seolmi, and she was a messenger from the monster world. Putting on the mask, Yushin said that if Siva was unjustly killed or injured, then the head shaman of the Hall of Stars will destroy everyone involved and walk away. Seolmi fell to her knees and started yelling that this was the first time she was seeing a shaman and almost died of fear. Looking at Siva, she thought he was special even to shamans. Turning her voice, Seolmi saw Goya approaching and asked if he had come for her. Goyu replied that there was nothing else to do as she rushed forward, not knowing how strong the enemy was and that she could be eaten. Turning to Civ, Goya asked if he was the reckless half-goblin. Monsters from animals are called beast demons, bound by their form and instincts. They are called ghost beasts when growing out of the power to change both human and animal form, and divine beasts were those who outgrew their form and were worshipped by monsters and humans alike. Goyu said he was glad to meet him, and that Civ would have to defeat him to become king of the monsters. When Goyu said hello and extended his hand, the atmosphere changed. Sivu noticed this, but extended his hand in return. But all of a sudden, Seolmi shouted why he was doing such a thing, that it had been a hard day, and that he wouldn't shake Goya's hand. But with Goyu's prodding, they did shake hands, and Goyu said it was funny to see a goblin who wanted to be king. Suddenly, a circle of fire formed around them. This technique was called falling earth. And they flew down and landed in a completely different place. After landing, Sivu's body shook, and Goyu said he was stronger than he looked. Goya continued that people do not often stay on their feet after the ground falls. Moreover, Sivu wasn't even surprised and asked Goya if he wanted to eat it. Goyu said it would probably end up that way, but I wanted to ask you a question. I asked Goya if Sivu plays video games, and he said he did in middle school but not so much in high school. Then Goya asked what genre Sivu preferred, and he said he'd rather have an action RPG since he's not a fan of video games. Goyu gave Siva a strange look and said they had much in common. Behind me, I heard a noise and looked back. A huge diamond was licking out of the water, and from it many different smaller crystals started flying towards Sivu. But Sivu bounced and ducked, and then Goyu said Sivu was proving very fast. Goyu stood there thinking that instead of attacking Siva, he had focused on him and dodged the attack. Believing that Sivu was watching him, Goyu thought that, as a rookie, his tactics were good. When it comes to combat, all of Sivu's senses and talents are superior, and previous enemies have taught him vigilance and attentiveness. The lesson Sivu will learn today is that a wristband is an armor that releases the wearer's energy and life force. And one more lesson, even if the attack seems to hit the target, you can't relax early. Clenching his fists, Sivu thought he had figured out a bit about the force that static electricity runs through his entire body, starting with his stomach. There is about 60% or so of the magic left. When you attack hard, you spend about 10% of your magic. The minor attack takes away about 3%. If it reaches 0, it is depleted as it was last time. The battle was over, and Goyu didn't think he would use the ability so early. He said he underestimated Siva. Sivu said he didn't feel any desire to harm him and asked if he really wanted to eat him. Goyu replied that he had no grudge against Sivu, and his desire to eat him just got him caught up in his words. He also asked Siva if he understood what a monster king was, and he replied that you make laws and rule over other monsters. But Goya said it was strange that a king would rule for hundreds of years, and it was decided by some festival. Goyu explained that all monsters are loyal to instincts and desires, and just because the strongest made up a law, it doesn't mean everyone will obey it. So that there would be no massacre, the ancients invented the king of monsters and decided to keep this pattern and submit to the king of monsters in exchange for their prosperity and hormones. Goya says the difference among all the kings was only in the present. If the leader of the people banned everyone from eating meat, what would happen? If Sivu responded, it would hardly end with one protest. All the monsters held on for a very long time and were very patient, so the king of monsters is important and no one wants to break tradition, said Goyu. And if the next king extends the law, not all monsters will be as obedient as before, which led Sivu to this conclusion. And it was true even if the king orders, the monsters might not obey, said Goya. If the majority is against it, the king will fall, and his power and symbol will be destroyed. Remembering Sivu's words that he would become king and extend the law, Goyu warned him that the older monsters might tear him apart. Realizing where the wind is blowing from, Goyu said that he simply does not understand how the world is tripled and is foolish to speculate about it. At first, Goyu thought Sivu was a brat, but then he realized he was more mature, quick to grasp things, and had potential. He offered to take over his command, saying he wouldn't hurt Siva's loved ones. Sivu asked if Goya objectively assessed himself as selenium and why he was convinced he would become king. Goyu replied that he was the strongest on the Korean peninsula and that no one was stronger among the representatives. Sivu accepted the offer, knowing he could protect the people around him. Shaking hands, Sivu said it was the right choice and that he wouldn't feel guilty because Goyu himself had broken their trust. Said Goyu, pretending to shake hands and attack first because those were his chips. He used a technique unlike anything he had done before, used up all 60% of his magic, and did it confidently and intelligently. After the blow, Sivu sat trembling and realized that his body wouldn't stop shaking due to the power of the monsters. For Sivu, who had poured all his strength into the attack, there was only a little left to spare despite his body and stamina recovery. He is now out of all resources and cannot continue the fight. Standing over Sivu Goyu, he said that one should restrain oneself until the last moment, and then spend all the monster's power on a single blow. If the difference in strength had been a little less, said Goya, who knows, maybe Siva had eaten Goya. Continuing to stand, Goya asked Siva to say the last words. If Sivu had a will, he wouldn't have read it out. He was prepared to be eaten, and he wasn't done yet. Sivu wasn't going to beg for his life because he was waiting for the moment to strike, or the goblin spirit to awaken in him, but he didn't realize it. Prior's strength to stand spoke Goya, and Sivu spoke well. Goyu raised his hand, agreeing to this, and Sivu was already preparing for another attack. Goyu patted Siva on the shoulder and said with a smile that he had passed the test, and did not disappoint him even at the very end. Sivu stood in shock with hundreds of questions in his mind. Goyu wanted to see if it was worth rooting for someone who could become king of the monsters, so he made this test. Sivu didn't understand anything because Goyu had just explained that he couldn't become the king of monsters. Goya said everyone wants to see who will become king of the monsters, and not everyone is eager for the monster night. Since childhood, Goya has disliked the noise of the monsters, because they tear each other apart and scream and think it's normal. After all, the world of people is quiet and peaceful, and people can choose and live as they want, although they live chaotically. Plus, monsters, like people, can occupy themselves and their free time with games or movies, and that's not in the monster world. And they like it better than eating people, and if the human world is gone, it will be a tragedy. Sivu realized that many monsters think that way, and said he didn't need to cheer for him anyway. The Korean peninsula has every chance to win. Still, there is one problem, no matter whether Sivu becomes king or not, said Goyu. All the candidates, including Goya himself, came from famous families, and their talents were inherited. Unique monster techniques are passed down from ancestors, and someone who has a manual on how to use them will be much stronger by definition. As they say, it is the same in the world of men supposedly born with a golden spoon in their mouth. Family is a conglomerate passed down from generation to generation, and it is very pressurizing, asked Siva. Goyu replied that as soon as talent appears, you become a representative of your family, and whether you want to or not, you have to work for the benefit of others. If the representative is against it, he is sent to the bottom or even deprived of life so that others will not be like him. But Sivu's talent is inherited from a known lineage and is not tied to clan or family, and there is a motive to become king because he is different. And Sivu just has to become king of the monsters, almost shouting at Goya. Sivu asked him to give him time to think because it all happened suddenly. From Sivu's point of view, it was all accurate, said Goyu, and at that moment, Small Me flew over to them. She gave Goya the most brutal blow without landing on the ground, and he flew quite far away. When Seol Mi kept attacking and throwing feathers at him, Sivu tried to stop her. When Seol Mi stopped, Goyu had already dived somewhere very far away, knowing that a curse would come from her. Seol Mi started explaining to Siv that it wasn't exactly the original Goyu, and he had some sort of split personality. According to legends, the black turtle is the spawn of two creatures, a snake and a turtle. But in the distant past, one genius who knew why yin and yang were needed to separate them from his monster's power and shared the monster's power. As a result, he awakened as a divine beast, and the first sulfur turtle appeared. While already in the apartment, Solem continued to tell me that to become a full-fledged turtle, you must undergo painful training. A side effect of such a process was the snake that Sivu was socializing with, but he seemed okay with it. Goya lacks anger and the ability to think deeply, so he's impulsive, does whatever he wants, and is vicious. A personality is created from the energy of the yang force, and whether it is because of this or not, Goyu's personality is very cold-blooded and calm. However, as far as Seolmi knew, this side is completely subordinate to the turtle and is in charge of analysis and strategy. But Goyu's snake was crazy, and for some reason it had the ability to gain control of his body, which caused trouble. That's why when he was elected as a representative, many were against it and called him a half-skull. Still, Goya is very talented, and the opponents were persuaded. It was necessary to go back, and Seolmi asked if Sivu was ready. Seolmi asked not to worry about being late, but Sivu said he wasn't worried. The porch was broken, and when Sivu's mom came back and saw it, she was very concerned. They both turned around and heard someone say there was no need to worry. Grandfather Babai stood on the doorstep and said that everything would be restored for this purpose tomorrow, and asked Siva to stay to talk. Seolmi started to say that Sivu had done everything right, and it was all her fault. But Grandpa Babai already knew that. Grandpa also added that Seolmi shouldn't be here, and they should talk to the three of them, but there was no third person in the room. Such visits are certainly rude, but Siv needs to shake another hand. Seolwa was already standing in the living room, looking at the people, and said the place was small but cozy. Confused, Shivu asked if she had already gotten permission to visit the human world, and Seolwa said no. And she wasn't going out into the human world at all, she was just dragged here. Grandfather Babai should explain everything, said Seolwa, and he started to talk about something that happened tonight. When it got dark in the human world, about 50 Jurglots appeared and attacked people in the streets who were obeying someone. It turns out that the intruder didn't wipe his tracks, and Grandpa Babai thought it was to lure Seolmi out and target Siva. Seolmi asked Babai what he meant by, that wasn't the goal, and he replied that perhaps the goal was more than one. At least 200 people disappeared from the streets and subways of Seoul overnight. According to statements received, the number was taken from police stations, but in fact, over 500 people were missing. Seolmi assumed that a whole group was working, and if there was a list of suspects, they could sit on it and work on it. If the person who did this is from the Korean peninsula, they'll easily find him. Still, the crime scene footprints suggest an unpleasant conclusion. It was assumed that the monsters came to Korea from other regions, since catching them here would be much harder. Grandfather Babai added that if these monsters are not caught and punished, people will be hunted half a year before the festival. Grandfather Babai would change the test format if Seolwa and Shivu agreed to help. The task was to capture and destroy the monsters that invaded the Korean peninsula as soon as possible. Yushin Ko couldn't sleep all night, and on the way to school, he thought he was wrong to let Siva go so easily. Thought about doing something about it. If something happens to Sivu, it will be awful. Yushin saw Siva in front of him, who told him that his phone was switched off and that they had met on the way to school. Sivu said they needed to talk because a lot has changed since yesterday. When they were talking at the cafe, Yushin was yelling so loud that people were turning around. Sivu apologized and asked Yushin to be quiet because you can't yell publicly. The conditions were good, and Sivu could be in the human world, and Mom wouldn't worry as much as Yushin. Sivu didn't know what class of monster he belonged to because just yesterday he discovered he was a monster. Yushin pronounced Shinryun Kigosu and explained that each of the 5 words symbolized the status of the monster, but to Sivu, it sounded mysterious. Yushin added that the lowest is Su, and most monsters are of that class. These pitiful creatures are not far removed from ordinary beasts. Their strength is the same. Ordinary people can fight them in old records. There are cases where you can fight them with no problem with current weapons. The problems start at the higher grade when ordinary people can't do anything to them. Go are monsters with the strength of at least 100 people. Even if you send 1,000 people at them, they will still die. If these are the 2 low classes, what about the other 3? Asked Sivu. Yushin couldn't give an exact answer but said that key class monsters were dozens of times stronger than the Go class. If they are not contained, such monsters can turn a small town into a branch of hell on earth in one night. Yushin warned Sivu not to get involved in this hunt and to run away quietly. If he didn't get out, he asked you to hide at his place or call him. The monsters that came here are ready to fight the shamans. If they are key class, they will still be fine. According to the class's questions, Siva and Yushin, a monster that turns into a snake, said that such monsters are minnows. He was unlikely a class Ki, but he was most likely a medium Go. Still, the lifeless body controlling him was much more powerful. And if he had half the power now, friends wouldn't be discussing them in cafes like this. And if Yushin hadn't gotten there in time, the monster would have swallowed Siva. Yushin said that Sivu is, at best, a mid to lower Go, and his current status is lower than that of a monster. Yushin said you need to assess your situation soberly and avoid getting involved in difficult situations. Yushin thought we had to get that into Siv's head before he did something stupid. But Sivu said he could beat him 100% if he met him again. And if Yushin hadn't arrived at that moment, it would have been impossible, but everything changed, Sivu said. Sivu said he's figured out how monster power works and how to fight a little. Standing up from the table, Yushin heard Sivu ask him where he was going. Yushin called Siva to help him figure it out because he couldn't do it alone. They came to the Olympic Arena built in 1986 to host games in Seoul, but is now known as a large concert dome venue. Seeing such a thing, Sivu didn't even think there was such a place in the basement and asked if it all belonged to the Yushin family. But Yushin said this place was created by the government because there are other shamans besides his family. The authorities did not keep shamans with them, perhaps the first shamans, and created the concept of the state because the ability to fight monsters was very valued. With the change of king, the threat of monsters disappeared. Still, the Joseon family created a constellation hall, and the Yushin family continued to serve. Monsters in the Festival is nationally recognized, but not everyone knows it, even at the top, and it is not taken very seriously. They stood in the middle of the training room, and Yushin asked Siva to attack if he was ready. Yushin said there would be no restrictions or rules, and if Sivu wins, he won't worry about Sivu fighting monsters. Immediately, Sivu asked if Yushin would use a sword or dagger, and Yushin assured them that they could only fight on those terms. Shamans should not part with their weapons as without them. They can only show half of their powers. But Yushin can fight Go-class monsters without any weapons. If Sivu can beat Yushin, he's a class monster above Go. Sivu rushed to attack, but Yushin repelled the attack and hit Sivu back so he could rammed into the hall floor. Yushin didn't ask if Shivu was okay. It didn't make sense. He knew when he hit him because he saw Shivu's body regenerate. And since he wanted to save his friend, he didn't hold back. But Sivu stood up and asked how Yushin was. Shivu realized that he wouldn't hurt Yushin even if he didn't control his power. And Yushin realized that his friend was much more dangerous than he had thought. The atmosphere in the hall changed, and Sivu was the first to attack, trying to land a blow. In flight, Yushin realized that Shivu had become much faster, but his manner of attack had not changed. Sivu grabbed Yushin's arm, and he got a knee strike in return but picked it up, trying to make a throw over himself. But instinctively, in Sivu's mind, the words were spoken as if a spell for the horizontal descent to descend and become one. Lowering his hand, Yushin jumped away from Sivu, surprised, and asked what he was holding in his hand. Is that what he was thinking about? Sivu held a goblin baton in his hand and thought it was the first time he'd ever pulled it out of his free will. At the moment, Sivu's condition is not good, but physically, he is not bad. The problem was in his spiritual energy. During the last fight, Sivu had expended 93% of his energy, and it would take a full day of rest to recover it fully. However, the current exhausted state was helped greatly when Sivu pulled out the goblin's baton. Even if he lacked control over his body, his senses and consciousness sharpened, allowing him to remember that moment. Yushin had read about the baton in ancient documents, and he did not understand whether the power of this weapon was exaggerated or whether the problem was in the owner. But the docs aren't wrong, and Yushin said he wasn't particularly impressed by the video and felt. Flying almost to the ceiling, Sivu aimed at Yushin to strike with the goblin baton. Yushin made a block and thought he was in an enhanced state, and there was nothing he couldn't defend against. Yushin decided to hold the defense and wait for Sivu to run out of steam because there was no reason to shorten the distance. Sivu turned the baton into a rope and hooked it to the ceiling, saying it would work. And an uncomprehending Yushin looked at it and asked what he was doing now. Smiling, Sivu replied that it would be challenging to fight up close and to contain that fist-like thing. There are things that Sivu realized he couldn't replicate the power of a past punch, but he could change shape freely. And Shivu has enough cunning to use it and strike as if he threw a fireball at Yushin. The so-called explosion happened, and Yushin realized that the aura remained the same, but the shape and strength of the growth had changed many times over. While hanging from the ceiling, Sivu heard whether he really wanted to play dirty. Yushin replied that he himself had tried to fight to pass the monster handling skill test. And in a fight like this, it's better to be mean. There's no point in fighting fair in a battle for life. And Yushin trembled and thought that you can't argue with such arguments. After all, there are a couple of buddies who decided to fight, and Sivu's abilities aren't enough to fight fairly. Yushin said he'd had enough of the nonsense, and a scuffle broke out. Yushin realized that he needed to get faster because holding off Sivu's attacks was getting harder. When Sivu threw another punch again, there was an explosion. Sivu asked if his friend was okay. But Yushin seemed already injured even though he changed tactics to minimize Sivu's attacks, which became much stronger. Right now, Yushin is not using any techniques. This is hindering him a lot, and he cannot use most of them. By adding his own energy, Yushin creates a weapon of divine power. And even if this weapon is hastily made, the power needed to win is incredible. When Yushin strikes, he breaks the goblin's baton. The reason Yushin didn't kill Siva was because his friend was standing in front of him. During the fight, Sivu punched Yushin in the face, knocked him out, and asked why he spared him, since he would have recovered anyway. Lying on the floor, Yushin replied that he had used all the power of the art of exorcism. And if the enemy is a yokai, he wouldn't be able to withstand even a level of chi, no matter how strong he is, just as Shiva's baton shattered. It's just that the technique recognizes creatures like non-yokai, said Yushin, adding that Shivu is the real villain. The next day, the boys were walking towards school, and Yushin was terribly annoyed that Sivu was nervous to go along with him. Sivu asked Yushin if his nose hurt badly and if the scar would stay there. Yushin said that he had been training his body for a long time and that the broken bones would heal in a day, and asked if Sivu held back when he punched him in the face. In a second, he realized that the attack didn't work and weakened the blow, and if Shivu hadn't done that, Yushin would have been left without a nose. Yushin permitted Sivu to run around the city chasing monsters if he wanted to, because he had potential. Shivu was surprised when he held the so-called gourd that Yushin had given him. They were disposable bombs, and in order to activate them, you had to clasp them in your hand or throw them hard on the ground. Then the pumpkin magic would activate. Use it when there's danger, Yushin warned against smashing several things together. Sivu didn't realize if he could take 3 at once because they stored a lot of Yushin's energy. Yushin couldn't believe how Sivu knew about it and asked if he had seen them before, but that wasn't the point. Holding Shiva in his hands, I could feel the energy that Yushin used in battle. These are the 3 colored streams of the accumulated type of Dharma tool used by the Yushin family. When shamans have time, they pour their energy inside the gourd to use it in a heretical situation, and it's not just the host that can do this. Yushin asked Siva to show him his hand so he could see his fate, but that's generally not true. But there was something to understand, and Yushin looked at Siva's hand and couldn't believe his eyes. Sivu doesn't have a predisposition. He has the talent level of a spiritual man like a master, or a guru like a shaman. If Sivu wasn't a monster, Yushin would have told his father because, with his talent at that level, he would have been accepted as a rookie, and no one would have imitated him. But the stubborn goofballs would never agree, and most likely got it wrong. After all, Jastwu was a goblin with the talent of a shaman, and if he wasn't a friend, Yushin wouldn't look at him so kindly. Letting go of Shiva's hand, Yushin said he had a very messed up life and asked when he would be coming to school again. But first we had to get Siv a new uniform because he had no clothes. Yushin anticipated the reaction of the whole school, because if you don't say who he is, no one will recognize Siva. Siva was getting dizzy at the thought, and Yushin looked at his phone and said it was too late. Sivu suggested they eat nearby, but Yushin asked why they couldn't go to his place and eat there. They remembered the fried rice that they had last time because it was very tasty, but Sivu replied that there was a problem with that. Siva went on to say that he had a guest at home, was most likely asleep right now, and would need to be excused after they had eaten. Yushin said you don't have to say what you don't want to say and added that you can do whatever you want with monsters. Yushin left after saying that the snack was postponed because Sivu had things to do. Turning around, he added that there was no need to be sad as if you had committed a crime and that you should go to the meeting with squared shoulders. When he reached a certain neighborhood, Sivu wondered if he had come to the right place because the knowledge seemed abandoned. Standing before the iron door, Sivu read the inscription, Home of the Rising Dark Moon. The door opened, and on the threshold stood a tall, dark guy much taller than Sivu. Sivu thought it was a monster and very strong looking at him, and the guy turned around, saying that a new guest had come. A girl named Hanryun appeared in front of Sivu. She introduced herself as the head of the House of the Rising Dark Moon. Sivu introduced himself, said he was given this address and told to come here first. Hanryun said she had heard about Sivu from the elder Yuman and asked to follow her. Once inside, Sivu thought that not only was it dark, but a black fog was enveloping everything around it. Taking a few more steps, Sivu was confused by what he saw. After all, he had gotten into a training camp, he thought. When they were already seated at the table and drinking tea, Sivu thanked Hanryun for his hospitality. Sivu wondered if they were in Seoul because no houses were nearby, and the air was immaculate and fresh. So the House of the Dark Moon was distant from the world of men and civilization for hundreds of years. And precisely because of this, the air was clean. This place is a store of various monster products that help the inhabitants of the monster world to adapt to the human world. Sivu showed a box containing coins from Babai's grandfather and said he could use the currency there. Hanryun said she would help buy and exchange such coins, which are often traded for human money. At people's current exchange rate, one coin won 3 million, including commission. Sivu's calculator immediately turned on, and he calculated that if he exchanged all the coins, he would get 720,000 won. And for Sivu, they brought out a chest containing demonic spirit pills. In this chest were 9 containers of different colors, 3 white, 3 yellow, and 3 black. This store's most popular item was the demon spirit pills that accelerated the monster's power recovery. The pill allows monsters to regain strength after use. especially in environments where monsters are naturally weak, such as the human world. As soon as Sivu found out about it, he started saying that he buys from it and asked if the effect depends on color. The container's colors were responsible for the grades of the demon pill, and the price of white, 10 yuan, differed from that of gold, 3 yuan, and 1 yuan for black. The higher the class, the faster the recovery, and if you're in a hurry, it's better to use the black pill. Hongrian suggested consuming the black now, but the effects would appear closer to nightfall. But there will be no difference because monsters often argue about strength. Still, there are two criteria: the strength and speed of absorption of titanium. Size is also called the total amount of monster power. It increases with age and the number of creatures eaten. But with speed, it's more complicated because of the environment and the food monsters consume, so it usually depends on talent or pedigree. High-ranking monsters spend 3 to 4 hours absorbing the black pill, but with the body of a half monster in a couple of days, half of it will not be absorbed. But if Siva absorbs even a fraction of it, his maiden will be restored by nightfall. According to Hongrian's estimation, the black pill is a potent medicine for Sivu. With one pill, he will recover 4 or even 5 times. But not a minute later, Sivu swallowed the black pill like an explosion had happened. Hongrian fell to the floor and couldn't believe what was happening. Shivu had swallowed the pill and only a few seconds had passed. At this time, the full extent of his monster power had recovered, even though it was only the 3rd day of Sivu's life as a monster. Sivu experienced 100% or more of his monster power for the first time in his life. In honor of young Master Yusoma's visit, Sivu was offered a specially prepared liquor made from 6 flowers that grow on the Sansu River. When Yusoma tasted the drink, he liked it, but he did not know that they were serving such a drink to a milkman. He was also unhappy that Hongrian didn't care about him since she would only return after meeting someone. But the drunk guy said it wasn't true, and Hongrian was late because of his business. The guest judge talked about paying a little visit, and Yusum asked what kind of guest the guy was. The guy didn't know, but there was an assumption of a half-monster. Yusum thought that again it was up to Siva and grandfather to just leave that dried-up vein to perish. I couldn't believe Grandpa was running around to find this half-monster and make him fight at the festival because he couldn't even be called a participant. The guy with the drink got quiet and Yusum asked, and not because he was a half-monster loser like him, and began to talk about what his sister had told him, that the Dark Moon was really just a bunch of half-breeds with nowhere to go. Yusum kept saying they were strange freaks who didn't consider themselves human. Still, no one considered them part of the monster kingdom either. This place was created by the efforts of the half-breeds so that they would not feel useless, and Yusum cleverly continued it, and summarized that the day would never come when people like them would be called real monsters. But in response, he heard that his cup was empty and whether he needed another refill. One day, the peddler who always peddles said, "Yusum, bullying the guy is boring anyway," and asked when he could go out. The guy said the money was for an apartment and all the documents were prepared, as Yusum asked. They prepared everything quickly since the young master risked his life for the people. But Yusum said he did it out of disgust because there are strangers who allow themselves a lot, and he can't let it go. Moreover, if Yusum invested in his species' reputation, even his father wouldn't be able to deny the right to participate in the festival. After all, Yusum is not behind his brother and sister when it comes to innate talent, but for some reason, because he was born 100 years too late, his attitude is different. First, you have to get accepted as a candidate through Yuson and then overtake the sibling in 6 months. Yusom also asked where Hongrian was, and the boy said he would go and find her. Yusom stopped him and said he had something more important to do. Yusom wanted Hongrian to serve him while he was in the human world because he wanted to do something other than hunt aliens. The guy tried to explain to Yusom that he didn't have any, but before he could even finish, Yusom told him to shut up and serve the customer as he did. Yusuf asked the guy to tell Hongrian everything. Still, before they could finish, there was an explosion from when Sivu absorbed the black pill. So they stared out the window and didn't understand what happened. Water Ki flows in all things, and its composition is applied to each living thing differently. The laws are the same for all species, and even if you take a larger plate, it still won't fill up more than it can hold. Standing in front of Hongrian, who was lying on the floor, Sivu asked if she was okay. It seemed something strange had happened because of him. The pill was much better than Hongrian had said, for it felt like Shivu could do anything. At that moment, Yusum asked what kind of ignorant underdog was so brazenly venting his energy in this world. Confused, Hongrian explained that it was her fault and Shivu had nothing to do with it. Still, Yusum was already eager to teach him how to behave. But Yusum asked Hongryun not to get angry and shut up because he didn't give her the right to open her mouth. After all, he was sure that the monster's power was coming from Sivu, but he didn't realize where he was and kept releasing energy. Hongryun asked for forgiveness, but Yusum said he saw everything with his eyes and would pay attention, even though she made excuses. But Sivu explained that he didn't know how to control his power yet, and asked for forgiveness if he suddenly interfered with Yusome. Even if you do, you shouldn't speak so rudely to someone you're seeing for the first time, said Sivu. Angry at Siva, Yusome asked what he was thinking on Earth, but Siva said he was really sorry but shouldn't be rude. And using magic, Yusome struck Shiv and told Hongryun to look at him. He also said that he'd instill in Hongryun the idea that she wouldn't even think of stepping out of line, and it's not a fight, it's education. Allegedly, it's the process of teaching the filthy half-breed proper manners. Still, Sivu had already stood up by this point. Trying to explain, Hongryun said that the use of violence was forbidden here, regardless of the reason. And even if Yusome has a famous family, the Great Hall won't turn a blind eye if they find out about it. But suddenly, Hongryun received a punch from Yusome, who repeated the earlier words. He also said she was just a dirty half-breed like the rest of them, but Hongryun thought that for some reason, she didn't feel the power of monsters at all. What you can't see with your eyes came out of nowhere, and it was a unique ability of hate. And Yusum ordered Siv to come to him and fall on his knees before him for such a transgression. After listening to Yusoma, Sivu already clenched his fists, prepared to attack, and asked for no bullshit. Throwing off his sweatshirt, Sivu said that everything can be solved with words, and that talking about manners after a blow is not good. A battle began between them, but seeing Shivu repel the attack, Yusum and Hongryun were shocked. Sivu was already standing up and asking questions. He guessed that small water droplets had been launched at him quickly. And I realized that drops the size of a fingernail appear from nowhere and take moisture Yusum from the air or dew on the grass. The greater the distance, the stronger the blow. Sivu had a similar experience last night. In comparison, Yusum seemed like an underdog. Apologizing for offending, Siva rushed at Yusome with an attack. In flight, Sivu realized that Yusum was attacking with his right hand, and it could be seen through the power of monsters since he wasn't aware that they could be trained. Upon striking, Sivu realized it was just as he thought. It looked obvious. After the strike, Yusim was lying in front of Sivu when he said he had hit him after all. Hongryun was very shocked and couldn't believe it because it was her first bout with magic. Shifu had fended off the attack and could read the opponent's energy. As amplified, hiding the attack's direction, multiplied, and redirected it in the other direction, hitting the opponent exactly. The descendant of the goblins appeared only 3 days ago, and before that, Sivu was just an ordinary human, thought Hongryun. What could have happened to make a 3-day-old monster so strong? Standing over Yusum, Sivu told him to apologize and escape quickly. Pointing at Hongryun Shiva, he said that he shouldn't have hurt the man trying to avoid a fight, even if all the noise was because of him. Trembling, Yusum listened as Sivu told him it was his fault, and he needed to apologize. Yusum attacked Siva again and used magic to stick water in his hand, but in a frozen form. Another scuffle began with Yusum attacking and Sivu repelling the attacks and kicking himself. The unique magic of the Haitai clan is controlling nearby water, which helps to increase water pressure to the maximum. And to use water as a weapon sharp as metal, it works even with a grain of water in the enemy's body. Magic can be used as a poison that will destroy internal organs, including blood vessels and nerves. Even in spite of monsters' regeneration, losing a hand is a small thing, but the recovery from the infection itself lasts longer. Yusum started to say that Sivu surprised him a lot. Even as a half-monster, he wouldn't understand Sivu because he hadn't been through something like this. But all this is due to the exceptional bloodline Sivu inherited from his family, or just lucked out with the proportion of goblin blood, said Yusum. But Yusum wanted to help Siv realize that he was no match for a real monster because he was only a half-breed. And when Yusum said he didn't want to know if he was an absolute monster, Sivu said he was getting on his nerves. Despite Yusum messing up Siv's veins and internal organs, he was already healed, and Yusum himself couldn't believe it. Yusum applied one of the complex variations of pure water, which is called a reservoir when large streams of water are extracted from sources like rivers. It was called advanced technology because water can shrink so much that it violates even the laws of physics. The real weight is hundreds of times greater than it looks, and its speed and power exceed those of a fast-moving truck. Sivu was already standing with the goblin baton, focusing on the future rather than the immediate threat and needing to choose the proper form. If the form is appropriate to the situation, the power will increase many times, and the answer is clear from the start. And while there is no skilled swordsman to emulate, Sivu sharpened everything to pure sharpness, and along with the excess energy, released energy he wouldn't have been able to use before. As Yusom struck, he saw the water pour into the courtyard, breaking the roof. Yusom went outside and didn't see Siva, saying he disappeared. Attacking from the other side, Sivu said it didn't matter about losing an arm or a leg and struck by separating the arms. Standing over Yusom, Sivu asked if it hurt when their hands were separated, if he was a true monster, and if he should have gotten used to the pain. Saying that, Sivu threw one last punch at Yusom and he flew off. Yusom sat trembling because he was not used to this. He had always been loved and adored, and his family had protected him. Yusom wasn't used to the feeling that there was someone much stronger than him, and Sivu said it was time to apologize. Kneeling in front of Sivu Yus, he shouted that he had apologized. But Sivu said to bow his head properly to apologize to Hongryun. Yusom didn't want to do that, but Siva warned him to apologize and not ramble. Just then Hongryun approached Yusom, and he finally apologized profusely to her. In the human world, a voice came from Sivu's apartment asking for water. When Seolwa woke up, she realized she was alone and that Shivu had left her alone. When Muryong's head came to the house, he couldn't believe that he had been away for the first time in years and that this had happened. The guy who poured Yusom's wine said it was entirely his fault, but the head of Muryong said it was useless to blame himself. Besides, it wasn't your and Hongryun's responsibility to entertain him. So Hongryun asked Muryong, and the guy said she was hurt, but not that badly. Hongryun is overwhelmed with guilt over the situation, but she could have predicted what would come of it. The guy said that because of the speed of absorption, there was a chance of reflection, and Muryong asked him where the guest was now. Sivu sat in the room and cooled down a little at a time, and this time Sivu didn't completely lose control of his body. A little enraged by such power, but all the emotion and power was in his grasp. The vitality and emotion cooled down. Sivu lay back and thought that the fight was justified no matter who turned to violence, and separating the hands was also necessary to nullify the effects of the magic. And even now, Shivu would repeat it without delay, for he took pure pleasure in separating Yusoma's arms. Then Hongryun knocked on the door and asked to come in, and when she came in, Sivu asked if she was okay because she had been shot. Hongryun replied that the wound wasn't deep and it was fine, but Sivu said she was spitting blood, and it was a pretty serious wound. Lowering her head, Hongryun began to apologize to Shivu, and said that she had lost control and behaved inappropriately. Interrupting her, Siva said he was responsible for the fight alone and should apologize for the roof. However, Hongryun said that she shouldn't have offered the black pill because the needed effect could have been achieved with a silver or gold pill. Sivu didn't expect this and realized that he had been cheated, and the black pill was the most expensive one. As Sivu has already heard, Hongryun is a half-breed child of a human and a monster who is born with the essence of life and can sense monsters' energy. But they can't absorb it, so the situation is miserable and painful, and the half-breeds have an eternal thirst that they can't quench. And even if they take half-breeds to absorb the bright lotus pill, they will only moisten their lips, so Hongryun envied Shivu. Among the half-breeds, Sivu is a true marvel. Despite his mixed ancestry, his abilities are comparable to those of purebreds. The dark elixir was hers for the benefit of Hongryun. Just seeing in Shiva, all she wanted was to play a prank. Committed an act of deceit and incompetence as a salesperson. You can lose your life for it, and it doesn't matter what the punishment is for it. Amid the conversation, Muryong entered the room and said that the blame would eventually shift to whoever accepted the apology. Shivu and Hongryun didn't expect Muryong to come in. Still, he introduced himself and apologized for everything, and sent Hongryun to entertain the guests so she wouldn't put on a show. After accepting the apology and telling Siv about it, asked him not to think of him again and would like a refund for the pill. When Hongryun came out, they sat at the table and Muryong said he would like to arrange a reconciliation meeting. Sivu fought the youngest son of the Haitai tribe of divine beasts, and their tribe cannot shame the dignity of divine beasts. Muryong didn't think it would be a big problem for Sivu, but misunderstandings that won't go down well can happen. When Yusom left, he threatened that he wouldn't let it go and make Siva regret it. Before things escalate, we need to have a conciliation meeting and listen to the parties' statements. After all, both sides are in an unpleasant position, so Muryong asked Shivu not to be too strict. Subi said he didn't have to go there or take responsibility for settling the conflict. If they came to him, he'd tell them everything. After all, Yusom escalated the situation from a simple apology to an insult, and Sivu did what he should have done. It will be clear to anyone, right? Hongryun and Yusom should apologize for bringing things to a fight, making it easier for Shiv to fight. But Muryeon said not to underestimate Haitai because even Yusoma's younger brother is on an entirely different level than the monster Shivu fought with. Sivu said he naturally didn't see many monsters, but fought two stronger than him. But in the end, Siv has to defeat them all to become king of the monsters. And it seems Sivu was serious, but you don't want to say that anywhere else. But Sivu understood this after all, and Yushin had warned him, but he was ready. Vedi, it was Yusum who got hot and bothered, and if he heard that Sivu wanted to be king, it would have been a disaster. And just the thought of someone like him walking around the world in half a year is terrifying. But Muryeong has heard many statements about wanting to stop the Night of the Monsters because it's a bold statement, and Sivu said he really thinks he's going to be king. And these words intrigued Muryeon, for he thought it was just a poor kid, but he jumped to conclusions. This is the first time Muryeon's premonition has been hyped up so much since the era of the last owner. He placed the amulet on the table and said it was a gift given as an apology, but he wanted to rephrase so that Sivu would definitely accept the gift. It's too early to think about it, but Muryeon wanted to invest in Siva's future. Walking home, Sivu looked at his watch and realized it was already lunchtime, thinking he had had a hectic day. But Seolwa came in, asking where he was and why it had taken so long, and Shiv had to excuse himself because he had been away for so long. Seolwa said that he hadn't been gone that long, and she had gotten some information during his absence. Standing before Seolwa, Sivu saw a black bird on her arm and said hello, thinking it was Seol-mi. But the bird lunged at him, and Seolwa clarified why he thought it was Seol-mi since the bird's coloring was different. "You have to be careful with Seol-mi," said Seolwa. "Even though she's 40, she doesn't have a single white feather on her," which upset her as a child. A shocked Shivu agreed with her words, and Seolwa added that this bird was sent by Seol-mi because she had been gathering information since last night. A large number of people have gone missing in the past month, and the locations of the missing are concentrated in a few neighborhoods. Maybe it's like a hunting ground for outsiders, and they'll be hunting weirdos from one of these spots today. But for that, you have to prepare, and at that moment, Seolwa punched Shiva in the face so that he fell down. And she said she wouldn't complain about the atmosphere, but she didn't really want to wear a sweat-soaked suit because she thought he'd bring something decent to wear. Looking at Shiva, Seolwa said that they were going clothes shopping today, or rather right now. Standing in front of the big building, Seolwa said it was the best department store in this country and asked what it was called. Shivu replied that it was a department store, and he wasn't sure if it was the best, because it could be better. Shilwa marveled that people had built something impressive without the help of magic. This was the first time Sivu had bought clothes for himself. At this age, appearance is significant, and Sivu has saved money and decided to enjoy this moment. An overjoyed Sivu said that Seolwa could measure whatever she wanted, and if she liked it, we'd buy it. It was really the first time, and Sivu had no idea what the price tag on clothes was now. When he saw it, he was in complete shock. The seller was amazed because few guys like Sivu bought so many clothes. When the salesman turned around and saw Seolwa, he said it suited her and indeed did. Sivu was happy to give 5 million for the clothes and said that Seolwa looked cool. Walking out of the store, Shivu looked at the bill and wasn't too happy about it. But Seolwa asked why she didn't ask him to get rid of what he had picked out for himself. A frustrated Sivu said to calm down because he had much to learn. Seolwa asked to look for more outfits since they would be here for more than a day and needed more. Shivu was very confused and didn't want to spend any more money, but Seolwa asked to come up to him and hold out his hands. He placed another 10 gold coins in his palm, saying it should be enough. Shivu was glowing with happiness, and Seolwa said that if he needed more, he should tell her, and he could keep the change. Turning around, Seolwa walked forward. Shivu followed her, holding the gold coins in his hands and looking at them frantically. Trying on different outfits, Seolwa asked Shivu's opinion, and he admired every outfit he chose. But then I got mad at him for some reason and wasn't even sure why. Coming out of the store, Siva asked how she had managed to pick up clothes like that, since it was her first time in the human world. As if Seolwa already had a formed taste in clothes, she said it was all because of Seol-mi. Seol-mi is carrying around Seolwa's gifts and fashion magazines, and she's annoyed by it. But Seolwa still read everything Seol-mi brought for her. As they talked, they kept walking, and Siva was pushed on the shoulder. It was a couple, and the guy accidentally poked Siva in the shoulder and immediately apologized. Seolwa said that people in general have degenerated. And when that happened, you had to make him pay for it, not much, but you could cripple him so that he couldn't even look in his direction, Seolwa said. Shivu panicked at what he heard and asked Seolwa if she thought it was okay to go that far. Seolwa replied that yes, you can. And if the monster starts acting so lowly, everyone will think he's a weakling. If everyone sees him as a weakling, it means that he is not dangerous. Even if you are a serious opponent, you can be beaten without consequences. Seolwa began to talk about how Shiwu had probably bowed to Haitai, even though he had defeated him but had let him go too easily. And Seolwa felt it as soon as Shivu entered the house, for he smelled of a wet dog, which was special and rare. Even if Sivu did win, it was most likely the youngest of the three chatterings, and still ugly. Seolwa said that the youngest was her friend's sister's brother, and they fought once. This girl who found out about them started an argument over nothing, and she's almost 100 years older than Seolwa. And of course, Seolwa tore her to shreds and told her to stay out of her sight. Seolwa hadn't seen the younger of their Hai since then, but knew that he was walking around and threatening her behind his back. Seolwa went on to say that one must win with confidence, and one must do so with confidence when using violence. Of course, you have to be prepared to kill everyone you meet. The couple that pushed Siva was in a hurry to get somewhere, and the girl kept rushing the guy because she had been waiting a week for this event. When she realized the guy had let go of her hand, she turned around and didn't realize where her boyfriend had gone. She looked around, waiting for him to approach her, and asked him not to joke around like that. In the cafe, a certain Madere was sitting at a table and talking about how all guys are not very tasty, only those who can fight. A mother and her child passed the cafe, and he looked at Madera, who was drinking tea there. Looking straight into the boy's gaze, she spit out the glasses from the man she had just eaten. The boy got scared and started screaming. Madere turned back to the counter and continued to drink her tea. Then another man approached Madera and asked to speak to him. Apparently they had a deal. The deal was that Madere's territory was the upper world, and another monster's was the underworld, and they were not allowed to enter each other's territory. The monster with glasses didn't understand why they should be separated since they were relatives. It said that the monsters of these places had already tracked them down. Madere asked if they would surrender because the broker's terms were not to fight the monsters here. But the monster in glasses replied that it was better not to cause trouble, and that as long as they didn't make a fuss, you could do anything. It's been a month since they started hunting, and the folks here are just now beginning to do something. The monsters of this region are simply worthless. They cannot protect their livestock, and most likely do not fear outsiders. They asked Madera to help, and said they would catch and consume the two local people who came to find them. At the department store, Shiwu realized that they had come not just for the clothes. Seolhwa confirmed this, and said that they were also here for information from Seolmi. After all, this department store is where people go missing most often. While shopping, Seolhwa, scattered seeds, and pandemonium areas are better to watch and grab. Instead of running away, the outsiders just sit here, and we need to make it clear that this town is not a hunting ground for outsiders. The department store was so crowded because it was the intersection of 3 subway lines. The bus terminal connects Seoul with other cities, thus creating the center of Seoul, where thousands of people pass by every day. Finally, Sivu realized that strangers avoid witnesses and cameras, because if someone disappears in a crowd, many people think that person has just moved to another place. Seolhwa wasn't sure about it, but she said that judging from the tracks, there were about 4 hunters here. It felt like Seolhwa was saying that they shared hunting grounds, even though she didn't know what kind of monsters were there. Sivu suggested that it would be better to tell the divine judge everything, for if many of them don't know anything about them, it is better not to flatter. It wasn't a bad option, but Seolhwa said there wouldn't be a fight then because they were provoking them. Seolhwa said it's like they know we're here but are not running. In other words, they have an escape plan in case someone other than us is involved. The strangers will just run away, which is tantamount to defeat for the locals, and since you need to catch them, running away is not suitable. After all, chasing strangers without harming people will not work. Besides, you need to obey the laws that are different from them. They would most likely apply this advantage at once because the master gave this test for a reason, and Seolhwa has not seen the solution yet. Looking at the time, Sivu said that the terminal and the area near the subway are unlikely to be empty, but the department store will close soon. Seolhwa said that even if staff is left after the closing, it won't be a big problem. When it was already nightfall, strangers stood on the roof of Brandon's department store, and a girl asked where a certain Madera was. And the stranger in the trench coat and glasses said she left without wanting to get involved in their business. Madera said she liked comfort, would rather rest and eat to her heart's content, and wasn't particularly interested in catching 2 lowlifes. Trying to persuade Maderi, He said there would be no problem because 4 men were enough to defeat the 2 here. But to Madere's eyes, the odds were 50-50 at the bottom, like playing roulette. There were no reliable monsters from the ones she'd seen here before. A monster in glasses and a cape asked Madere if she thought she was in their way. But Madere wouldn't bother anyone and wanted to look for a new hunting place since they were splitting up. As Madere left, she thanked her interlocutor and said that she had learned much thanks to him, but that it seemed to be the end. 3 strangers were already standing on the department store's roof, and 2 girls were asking why he had a weakness for Madere and was not fond of her. But he assured me that nothing had changed with Madere's departure, and she wasn't that strong. One of the girls said 3 should be enough, and she didn't think Madere would refuse, considering how she likes to devour people. The second girl asked what they would do when they absorbed the 2 newcomers, and the conversation with the other monsters should be tough. The guy had already prepared a place to hide, hunt in the area, and devour the monsters that would hunt them. After all, they have a geographical advantage. The locals can't use full force if you get lost in a crowd of people. Everything has limits, said one of the girls, and letting us live may be more dangerous than letting a couple of humans die so they lose. The guy confirmed and said that to do so, they'd have to absorb as much as possible until they returned to the continent and reached the realm of souls. The girls' names were Weiran and Byran, and the guy told them to think about their family's humiliation. They can't go home yet, but when they do, no one will dare underestimate all of us. After all, soon they will not be able to rule over the monsters of the Central Plains, but they will rule the next era and become monster kings. The strangers were surprised by the sudden appearance of a force of monsters that engulfed the entire building. A voice addressed the people, saying that it was getting late and that it was time to go home now. It was an applied, innate magic violet whisper voice that convinces surrounding creatures amplified by the monster's power. Applying from afar without direct contact, this ability is quite tricky. Standing on the roof in front of the strangers, Shiolwa said they couldn't be stupid enough not to understand her words. Only a genius among monsters with incredible technique and strength could cover the entire department store. The guy with the glasses didn't understand how Shiolwa had ended up on the roof because he was sure he could feel her floors below, as if she had jumped in 1 second. Looking at this guy, Shiolwa said she could smell the stench of strangers from inside the building and envied humans' dull sense of smell. Byran was already on edge and ready to attack, but the guy asked her not to be provoked and to go down Myran. I mean, they should have caught both of them. They and Byran can handle Byran, and she'll be the weaker one. She said that Myran could catch Siva and devour her, and she was thrilled about it and jumped down. But Shiolwa said it was a bad decision and should have told Myran to run far away and save her. In response to these words, Byran said she would rather worry about herself than their little sister. And the guy thought that Shiolwa was bitten and strong enough that if they had caught her a month ago, she would have beaten them. And Byran thought the same thing, but now it's okay because they've absorbed about 1,000 people in the last month, and they'll be fine. With the words, "Let's see what you're good for," Shiolwa went on the offensive and started using magic. At this time, one of the customers was standing against the store wall. Sivu noticed this and went over to her to ask what was wrong. She explained that there was an alarm and a gas leak, so we had to leave. After directing the woman to the main entrance, Sivu heard her say she had lost her grandson. Siva saw him on the ground floor and went to look for her because her grandson was very worried about her. Earlier, Shiolwa said her suggestion might not work because some people resist magic, and maybe persuasion won't work. As such, Shiolwa asked Shiva to go through the department store, look for those who disobeyed, and send them home. Sivu wanted to look around again, but at that moment, Wei Ran came in and said she had been looking for Sivu for a long time. When Wei Ran approached him, she said she wanted to talk to him because they hadn't seen each other and wouldn't fight. After all, she came to devour Siva, but Wei Ran didn't think he was nutritious enough for her, and besides, she liked his kind. Monsters don't have to consume each other, and unlike the older Wei Ran, she wasn't going to become king of the monsters. Wei Ran offered to befriend Sivu since he would be quietly absorbing everyone in 6 months. Sivu asked from downstairs if Aga had come. Wei Ran said yes and asked if Sivu had sent that old woman. Seeing her, Wei Ran had consumed her along with her grandson, and now, when they met, she realized what was needed. Before Wei Ran could say anything, Wei Ran was struck by Shiwu, who was furious about it. Standing and looking at Mai, Ran Sivu thought he had it all figured out, but it was far from that. Monsters are consuming people, and the last 3 days have been dark for Sivu to understand who monsters are and how dangerous they are. Only then did Sivu finally realize the danger that one monster posed to another, and that it was simply a catastrophe for humans. Standing up after being hit, Myron said Sivu was rude and could have just said. Sivu wasn't as weak as she thought, and she was apparently quite tasty. At the time of the fight, Sivu said it would be less gross to say I want to eat instead of like to do it. The fight was fierce, and Sivu, hitting Myron, made a hole in the floor. Jumping down, Sivu saw Myron, who said that he made a laughing stock out of her and that his monster power is even very uncommon. Looking at Sivamai, Ran saw the Goblin Club in his hands and said she had never seen anything like it before. This was Sivu's unique magic, and he ran to Myron to strike her dead, and saw Myron's hand become huge and grab the Goblin's baton like an ordinary stick. Sivu stood confused and didn't understand what this power was because Myron instantly recovered, and he didn't notice the movement to put up a block. Immediately, Sivu put up a block as Myron threw a punch, but he immediately caught her huge arm and swung her away. If Myron had seen what Sivu looked like, she would have run away without starting a fight. Myron said her arms and legs looked like this, but her torso and face looked disgusting. But Sivu told her it wasn't about the view, and Myron interrupted him and said it smelled like a decomposed body. Yakuija is what they've been called for a long time, and unlike other monsters, their kind was born to devour humans. And if her kind doesn't consume human flesh, then they can't consume life force naturally, and have consumed bodies on the battlefield. Such a species is on the verge of extinction because of laws, because it has been mistreated, and because it has been denied access to its main food supply. And most of their kind starve to extinction, not a few trying to escape into the human world to fill their bellies. But other monsters were destroying them, including Myron's parents, whom she doesn't remember. She's worried about her brother and sister, and the three of them without parents lived in the shadows of the human world. They couldn't take on a human shell, so they lived in the sewers covered in human shit and didn't know how awful they looked. But now Myron is cute and pretty and can walk in the sunshine and clean air instead of sewage. More importantly, some people have been doing it for tens of thousands of years, except for the last 666 years, and will do it in 6 months. And Myran won't give up this wonderful life for some law and so much to lose. Myran said she finally met a monster she likes, but doesn't want to consume it because of the law. But Siva was interrupted by Myron, who said he wasn't a monster and hoped this law would work forever. And instead of talking nonsense without meaning, wouldn't it be better if Myran attacked and she did? In the fight, Sivu realized that a head-to-head battle would be hopeless if she wasn't fighting at full strength, because she was now swift and decisive. Sivu has all the qualities of a monster, and he's special because of his lineage, talents, and combat experience. Likewise, his mental fortitude and ability to control the energy of monsters affected his strength. In this situation, Sivu's enemy surpasses his learning speed, and the difference in their species is very noticeable. But the fact that erases any difference in strength is human flesh. Here, Myron said she's almost settled in, and sure she'll be able to deal with Sivu without too much trouble. For monsters, consuming human flesh is like an elixir with many nice bonuses without side effects. And in the past month, the consumption of flesh has made Myron's growth so significant that she didn't realize it. Sivu took out the scroll that Grandpa Babai had given him and wanted to use that spell on the tables. Wei Ran said that this was the most potent attack of all, and given the advantage of distance, this attack had a good chance of winning. When Sivu got ready to attack, he said he wasn't quite sure. Attacking Sivu Wei Ran thought the spell would be no different from a simple barehanded attack, so she should finish it and absorb it. It would be nicer if Wei Ran knew Siva's name, but said meeting you would be nice. Depending on the strength of the fight, there was no bad chance of winning, and Sivu's failure to get the baton was a gamble with his life at stake. To repel Wei Ran's attack, Yastu grabbed her hand and said, "This is called a goblin spirit," and he won the game. A few hours before, when they were driving to the department store, Sivu had talked to Seolwa. She asked about the battle with the black turtle. Sivu wasn't sure if it could be called a battle because he put all of his power into it, but it didn't have much effect. Even though Sivu tried, Seolwa said that this approach was wrong from the beginning. After all, the black turtle's blood is thicker than water, his strength and skill are exceptional, and he is flawless in a fight, making him the best. Even if the monster is 500 years old, few people on the Korean peninsula can match its strength. And Sivu remembered that Seolwei is also 500 years old, which means she's affected by this too. Not thrilled to hear it, Seolwa asked again, but Sivu immediately apologized because he didn't mean to insult her. And with a smile, Seolwa said she would have won anyway because she was the strongest. He asked what Sivu was doing when he fought the turtle, because it must have been unpleasant when he fought against Seolwa. After all, Seolhwa used the tools that Seolmi and Shirim gave her to defeat Siva, and the cab driver was shocked by the talk of today's youth. Shivu said he didn't see the shock in him, as if he didn't care, and Seolhwa said he didn't even move. When Sivu used his technique, and since he's not a physically directed fighter, he either stood still or Sivu played on surprise. Sivu couldn't hurt him because of something else, not a difference in skill levels. It's simple. No matter how powerful the magic is, it still doesn't make everyone equally invulnerable because we all have the same state of power. Standing on the roof before the strangers, Seolhwa said she understood what was happening and wasn't too angry. Seolhwa's assumptions were correct, and the strangers were unusually strong. She was worried that they might be lost forever. And I thought they'd make Seolhwa get 4 tails, but 3 were enough if I tried 2. It was very interesting to see how many outsiders are on the Korean peninsula, and it looks like some have crossed the line. Seolhwa also asked how many monsters came from outside and who sent them to hide for a while, but the guy didn't want to give up and tell Seolhwa everything he knows. But Seolhwa didn't know how they pulled it off and lived secretly breaking the laws, and pretending everything was fine wasn't very good. And when the guy was about to attack, Seolhwa said it was better to be obedient and cooperate to save their lives. But the guy refused, and Seolhwa thought that judging by his energy, he could be considered strong by key-level standards. The guy started attacking Seolhwa, but she summoned the Supreme Demon, overpowering the Foot Emperor. As it happened, the Emperor's foot appeared and crushed his opponent with all its might. And no matter what you do, the result will be the same, no matter what level of strength. The guy's style is primitive brute force. After all, power lies not in the power itself, but in how you use it. And at that moment, a blackbird landed on Seolhwa's shoulder. Seolhwa realized it was Seolmi and asked if she had been there for a long time watching them. After turning into a human, Seolmi said that Seolhwa's reaction was boring, and the latter replied that she had reacted the first few times, and that was it. And Seolhwa noticed something was wrong with Seolmi, and it seemed she was very unwell. A lot of things happened, answered Seolmi, because she hadn't slept since last night and had been running all over the monster and human kingdom. She very much asked for help, because she was tired of collecting information, entertaining guests, dealing with the aftermath, and having a whole bunch of things to do. Seolmi asked to glamorize a couple of people, and Seolhwa agreed and asked what it meant to entertain people. Also, Seolmi said something was going on downstairs and asked if there were still monsters downstairs, and yes, there was still Sivu down there. Seolhwa replied that it was probably Shivu fighting the last stranger. A shocked Seolmi said she shouldn't have brought Shiva here, and Seolhwa said the monsters are strong, and if he's unlucky, he'll leave this world. She said she wasn't going to find him a minnow, and his skill set should improve over the next 6 months. After all, Sivu is a goblin. Even if his desire to become king is set aside, his very nature means he will fight non-stop. And if Sivu doesn't always fight for them, Seolmi just wants to block his way. Sivu's blood is thicker than water, so there's no need to worry. Just wait. Below, the fight between Wei-ran and Sivu continued, and the girl didn't understand why he was still standing there after hitting him more than 10 times. Unlike the club, only a few have this privilege because goblins are born with instincts and fighting skills. However, the goblin spirit would not be called a magical ability if it was a technique that relied on strength. That's why they're known as monsters that can't be defeated by wrestling. Sivu, standing in front of Wei-ran, said he tried something but got distracted. He said it was time to call it a day. Minimizing damage and redirecting the enemy's power is a fundamental principle, not only in spirit, but also in many martial techniques. However, it is not all that possible to reduce the damage and release it at the point of contact with the body to neutralize it. It's called a root, and it's as easy to break a tree with strong roots as it is to move a goblin who has figured it out. Standing firm and minimizing the damage caused increases the strength of the spirit and goes beyond the previous limits. And only then can Sivu show his true goblin strength. Minimizing the damage and thus increasing the strength of the force, he delivered the final blow. From the impact, Wei-ran fell several floors below and Sivu jumped down to her. And lying on the floor, Wei-ran asked her to finish her and return to her original form because she wanted to leave the world beautiful. But Siva didn't want to kill Wei-ran. He wanted her to tell him how the other monsters crossed the border. There was another reason, said Wei-ran, perhaps hoping for a lot. But when Siva heard something, he saw that someone had given him a hard punch. On the rooftop, Seolmi explained to Seolhwa that a few monsters from the mainland were among those who had crossed the border, and they had sent help to them, taking responsibility. Hwa said that if they were powerful, she would meet them, and Seolmi said that they had all the right skills. But there was one thing. Out of pride, they sent an assistant with an exceptionally high reputation. It was challenging to deal with him because he behaved very rudely. Seolhwa asked if they had sent an elder who had slept for 1,000 years, but no, it was a descendant of the great lineage. It was the great and wise, even heaven granddaughter of Sun Wukong himself. In front of Sivu appeared a girl who was very beautiful in emerald robes. Sivu introduced himself and said he was hunting foreign monsters at the behest of a divine judge, and the girl said she didn't care about him as long as he didn't cause any problems. From the accent, Sivu assumed the girl was from the Korean monsters, and she said the sinner behind Sivu deserved to be chastised. Plucking out one of her hairs, she said she would turn a blind eye to it, whatever the reason for Sivu being here, but there would be no second chance. And if Sivu doesn't want to leave this world with Wei Ram, he'd better back off. Blowing a hair off his hand and pointing it towards Sivu and Wei Ran, an explosion happened. But Sivu stood his ground, making a block with his hands, and the girl said he was stronger than she thought. Immediately, Sivu realized that if such a blow had occurred a little earlier, he would have been a lifeless body by now. However, a blow of such force proved very difficult to withstand for the young stem and roots of the tree Sivu. Sivu stood there and realized he could not reblock such a blow. But it didn't matter to the girl. Even if Sivu dodged her attacks, she would sew him up and pluck out another hair. Such an attack was called a rare rush of a cruel god, and immediately the girl was struck by Seolhwa, or the Demon King's fist. Seolhwa showed up because something was wrong and a circus was happening. Unsurprisingly, Seolhwa asked what kind of girl was in front of her and wondered why she was pretending to be doing something worthwhile. Instead of catching who ordered who and why, she fought the minnows. And you had to explain, not stand there with that stupid face to stay alive. Also, Seolhwa asked if Shiwu was okay and what about Wei Ran, but he wasn't severely hurt. The real reason was that Sivu stood out from the crowd even though he didn't notice it. The girl didn't really want to be on the Korean peninsula, and according to her, it turned out to be even worse than she thought it would be. And that no one here is dealing with the problem. How can you tolerate working next to Sivu and Seolhwa? Seolhwa said that the girl would be fine if the neighborhood work was done up her sleeves, and she didn't need to hold back. She had already started to bare her nails. The girls were already preparing for the battle and started to use magic as Sivu began to speak, and Seolmi's voice shouted for everyone to stop. Seolmi was clearly unhappy with Seolhwa's behavior and began to ask what she was doing. She reminded me that she had already said that the girl was a guest, and that if there was a conflict, it should be resolved rather than fighting with everyone instead of lunch and breakfast. And if there's a problem, will Seolhwa be able to take responsibility if she's capable of it at all? Turning around, Seolmi asked the girl, Xiaohuai, if she was all right and hadn't been sent to help them out. And whatever happened between Siwu and Xiaohuai, she was the first to use her magic. Even if Sivu is rude, a fight between monsters without the master's intervention clearly violates the rules because it is the absolute law of the king of monsters. As a representative of Master Sol Mi's word and will, he can't ignore this, and if Xiaohuai doesn't back down, he will have to do what is proper. We'll summon Xiaohuai to the central court and immediately report the causes of the conflict. Even if Seol Mi is an errand girl, not everyone can be an errand girl for the magistrate himself. Seol Mi is the candidate who wants to eat the heavens, but not everyone can spend a day like Seol Mi. Among those to whom Seol Mi must pass on the master's words are absolutely monstrous beings who pass on the message to those like them. Do not be afraid, but stand proudly. To the weak-willed, it will seem too much and vice versa. And if Seol Mi meets someone powerful, she can't get past the injustice. Xiaohuai admitted her mistake and said that in a moment, she lost her temper to prove something was just Sisyphus's labor. She added that she came here to punish sinners, not to mess with them, and since this is their land, she'll show respect if they don't get in the way. Pointing to Seolhwa and saying that especially her, and letting her remember it, Seolhwa said that Xiaohuai barely left alive. Anyway, Seolmi said the annihilation went according to plan, and they captured one. She also thanked Siva for his good work and said that many people had disappeared here, and thanks to him, it would be peaceful. Sivu was worried about having to close the monsters off from humans, but Seolmi said they weren't the only ones hunting that night. Many such hunters went out into the realm of men to fulfill this mission, and each was assigned his own platform. Although it's not easy, everyone hoped to catch most strangers today, but it wasn't just the monsters who took part in the hunt, but humans too. Grandpa Babai told Seolmi there was no direct cooperation, but they agreed on the zones. South of the Han River, the monsters to the north, the human shamans, are in charge of the sweep. In Cheonggu Namsan, after the sweep, a shaman was wearing a red mask named Yushin. Ji So-young approached him and asked why he decided to go alone, since, according to the law of Doryeonam, he could take 10 other shamans' assistants with him. But Yushin said he would manage on his own because there are not enough people for today's sweep, and they would only get in the way, and it is more convenient to be alone. But Ji So-young said it would be a great experience in command because it is an important role and duty for a shaman. The old man put Yushin in a position he didn't want, and if he wanted him to give up, he'd do it any time and become a shaman. A shaman who is unwilling to command or doesn't want to do anything himself is useless, said Ji So-young, and the monster behind Yushin's back is pretty big. He's probably from the Ki class. This is the creation of the group leader in Namsan, asked Ji So-young. Yushin replied that he was indeed from the Ki class, but not the leader. He was average in his group, and the leader himself was about the size of Namsan Tower. Single-handedly defeating a group of Ki class monsters, although lacking in experience, is very cool. No one in the Sensu division can achieve such an accomplishment, so the elder appointed Yushin as the shaman. The first genius in centuries to reach the level of Zen and Yushin asked what was next on the schedule to meet and report the situation to the Minister of Defense. There was no reply. Ji So-young needed to report to the head of police, and now they were already waiting, but Yushin wanted to sleep and report tomorrow. Today, Seoul was turned upside down. Ji So-young said the sweep was a success, but it may not seem that way to civilians. And even if you control the media, it is not 100% method. It can be blamed on the North Korean terrorist attack, asked Ji So-young. And you have to make people believe it. Rumors make even the most delusional news more credible. Well-spoken Yushin, but it's late, and tomorrow is the weekend. What's the difference? Ji So-young said they need to be at Incheon Airport at 7 in the morning. Not thrilled to hear this, Yushin asked why the sudden news was so sudden, but Ji So-young said she had just gotten the information from the elder. It seems that the famous Onmeizi family in Japan asked to send 2 people, and Ji So-young asked if Yushin knew anything about Kira's family. Yushin didn't understand why they needed him, but Ji So-young said it was to match the levels. The chapter's children were already at the airport, talking that everything seemed unreal, and even the air here was different. The girl asked her brother to keep it simple because it was their first trip across the sea, and they were hoping that Korea would be a fun place. In the morning at the airport, Ji So-young said it was a little late to bother with the translator, and Yushin said he couldn't just blabber on. Yushin didn't understand why their father approved the trip since shamans and Omeji had never worked together. But Ji So-young said there was already a precedent during the Japanese colonial period. Then, under the supervision of the Governor General, 2 Omeji arrived through the port of Busan, and they cooperated with Korean shamans. They were able to capture a supernatural being that created a lot of hype, but caused problems in the process. The atmosphere was far from friendly, especially between one couple who didn't seem to get along at all. It got to the point where one wanted to take the life of the other, and the damage was more than what they got during the exorcism. What is to be expected about the general work methods and outlook on things are very different from their positions, said Ji So-young. I warned Yushin that there may be disagreements between them, but they have no ill intentions. Yushin said if they don't like it, he'll just bail. Maybe that's what they want. The brother and sister were already waiting at the airport and thought that Ji So-young and Yushin must know their faces since they had sent them photos. Looking at the children of the head, Yushin said from far away that they looked so, and Ji So-young immediately agreed. Moving closer, trying to stay calm, Yushin told the guests he was glad to meet them. Kira bowed to say hello to Yushin and thanked him for coming to meet him at the airport. Kira introduced himself and said he was 16 years old, but 17 by the Korean system standards. She asked that they take care of her and her sister. Yushin was surprised and noticed that Kira knew Korean well and said he had learned it in school. But Kira's sister Nuna spoke better Korean and asked her to say hello. Nuna looked down at her phone, said hi, and continued to look at her phone. Kira apologized to his sister and said she wasn't firm in social interactions. She said her name was Nuna, and she was 2 years older than him. At this point, Yushin thought that you can't judge a book by its cover. They're taking a bigger risk. When they were all riding in the car, Ji So-young said that they had booked a hotel for them in downtown Seoul, and that if they didn't like the place, they should say so. But a joyful Kira said it was no big deal because it was said at the last minute, and thank you for finding something for them. Yushin asked for more details about the purpose of their visit. He had heard that it was an exchange trip and wondered what it was for. Also asked if they would be helping to exorcise monsters or just sightseeing and engaging in cultural exchange. Yushin asked directly so as not to beat around the bush because you need to know so there would be no misunderstandings later. Kira replied that they had come to investigate if a monster had escaped to Korea and they wanted to exorcise it. Nuna looked sternly at Kira and started to say something, but her brother interrupted her and said there would be no problem. My father said that we should act at their discretion because this is not Japan, and hiding information would be wrong. We should be open. Yushin clarified which monster Kira was talking about. If this monster came to Seoul, it could be spirit class and very dangerous. Kira didn't know what they call it in Korea, but monsters are divided into 4 categories in Japan. Demonic beasts are animals that lived so long that they gained intelligence and supernatural powers, and then became monsters. Vengeful spirits are human souls who have gained supernatural abilities out of strong attachment or resentment. Tsukumogami are the spirits of the old ancestors who are also called monsters, unlike the 3 previous ones from animals. People or objects of monsters, their energies are called spirits, and there is one exception among them, which they call tatarigami. The dark god in Korean is a monster that doesn't fit into any of the 4 categories, a monster created from the void. It is still unclear how they appear, but it is believed that they are born out of the fears and desires of all creatures, both humans and monsters. Although there is a difference between the species in one era, there are never 2 dark gods, and when one perishes hundreds of years later, another one emerges. Form and ability vary between species, but all have an unprecedented potential for growth and a thirst for it. According to records from their appearance, they are brilliant and grow through devouring and striving for it. For this reason, they are too dangerous. When a dark god appeared in the past, great chaos ensued, and monsters and shamans united to defeat him. Kiru asked if they knew which species the dark god belonged to. As he said, not yet, and I wasn't even sure if he was in Korea. However, thanks to a divine prediction of the dark god's appearance, it is known that he has already been born and is heading west across the sea. After bringing Nuna and Kira back to the hotel, Yushin said he would contact them tonight, but they needed to rest for now. Watching Kira and Nuna head to the hotel, Yushin said he had to help them and report the situation to his father because if it's true, it's a disaster. While destroying the monsters last night, Yushin wondered if someone was behind them and their purpose. Ji-Soen was talking about it. Each of them is a common monster. They became stronger to devour people, but if they did not understand how to use this power, then their destruction was a matter of time. Continuing, Yushin said that sacrifices are pointless if you don't ask the question. But what if the bottom has a purpose? Fill the streets with low-ranking monsters so we underestimate the situation. That may be their goal. Ji So-young agreed with Yushin and said that the big purge last night would finish everything. However, among the uncaught monsters, there is a dark god. Yushin said dark gods may be involved, and there are more than just local monsters here. China and Japan may have fewer of them, but they were also from other places, and if a dark god came from Japan, there is no guarantee that such a god would not come from other places. But dark gods are rare, said Yushin, and they are overly worried, but still, one should not relax. If the dark gods from other regions have become stronger, they will be nothing like the monsters they encountered at night. And maybe someone like the Yin and Yang masters came here to capture these gods. Sholwa and Shivu came to the forest and Moya Mountain, where the fewest people were. Seolwa said that even if a few people notice, it doesn't matter because this isn't a department store with many gawkers. He asked Shivu if he couldn't sleep because of the 2 people who died in the department store, and Seolwa said it was her fault. After all, I used the spell, which wasn't strong enough since it was the first time I used it on such a large area. It wouldn't get any better for him, but Siv wondered if there was anything he could do to help them. That's why Seolwa called Shiva, because situations like yesterday will happen again. From now on, Seolwa will train Shiva because that's her original role, and Shiva has a lot to learn to become a full-fledged monster. Even if your Sivu skill isn't as strong as Seolwa's, purification is proper. There are a lot of spells, like barriers and exorcisms, that can be useful in different situations. At one point, Shivu started to fall backward, but Seolwa picked him up and said he shouldn't be distracted, even if he was a goblin. Being close to each other, Seolwa held Shiva so he wouldn't fall and said the pose was great. Looking him straight in the eyes told him to relax, let go of his power, and not to fidget. Saying that it would be over soon, Seolwa tried to kiss him as if it were magic with the scent of a flower and the subtle smell of peach. It's a confusing sensation that Sivu hasn't experienced before, and a heart pounding as if after a run. Shivu closed his eyes, and when he opened them, he recognized the place he was in, but Seolwa said it wasn't real. This is the place deep inside Sivu's mind, the most inaccessible place of consciousness. Everything Sivu sees and hears is based on memories. Shiva is relieved that it's not real but a fantasy that doesn't exist and asks about Seolhwa. But Sivu talked to the real Seolhwa, and she said there was a special trick for him. One of Seolhwa's spells is the Violet Whisper, which introduces false stimuli into the brain through the senses. It creates visual and auditory hallucinations and can make you forget what you've already seen or make you do simple actions. But it's a little stronger than that. Not only does it introduce stimuli, opening the path of the mind, but Shivu and Seolhwa also temporarily merge their minds. Simply put, Seolhwa mentally went into Shiv's head, and there's usually no special reason to resort to that. But the results of their future tests were very curious to Solway herself. With a wave of her hand, she created a copy of a human being. Looking at him, Sivu couldn't believe it. For before he stood a replica of himself, this was the first time he would face himself. You can't say he's the same as before. However, this copy is created from the information in Sivu's memory. She also combined Seolhwa's memories of the guy she fought with, so the copy was of high quality. Shiwu was already standing with his fists clenched, and Seolhwa asked him, not wondering who would win, and said that the copy's monster power was probably the same as then, and Sivu remembered that the power was humiliatingly low. When the fight started, Seolhwa calmly sat down at the table and said that even without the monster's power, that guy was strong enough. Standing in the block, Sivu didn't understand why he had so much power in him. Was he really that strong? His strength and power surpassed the monster he had fought in the store. Sipping tea and looking at their smitten Seolhwa said that the talent was there, and that it would be harder if she were a monster that used her body directly. With an inexplicable level of fighting instincts, Sivu has been winning because of it. No matter how talented you are, fighting an enemy that surpasses you in many aspects is more difficult, and how to defeat him, thought Sivu. Even when Sivu put all his strength into a punch, there wasn't a scratch left on his replica. All the techniques Sivu had used before were formed due to this guy's influence, and when he pulled out the baton, he could change its shape. In other words, what his copy could do, Sivu could do, and he applied the earth control. It is the ability to reduce the damage received by transferring it to the ground to the point where the difference in monster strength does not matter. But Sivu knew how to do everything, so he grabbed him and tossed him up to see if he could use ground control without touching the ground. He took out a goblin baton and swung it at his copy so that it exploded while Seolhwa sat at a table reading a book. Approaching happily with Seolhwa Sivu, he said he had done well. Although the copy was strong, it was easy to determine weaknesses. Closing the book, Seolhwa said that Shivu did a good job, or instead, they both admitted she did. Shiwu was at a loss, but Seolhwa, laughing at him, asked him to look backward. And when Sivu turned around, he saw his copy standing without a scratch and with a hefty club like a tree trunk. Seolhwa said that at least Shivu recognized him as an enemy worthy of pulling out his baton. Before he could say it wasn't fair, Sivu received a crushing blow from his replica. And when he fell almost dead, he found himself in the place where they had come originally and was quite joyful. Seolhwa praised Shiva because she thought he'd be beaten much harder, but he did well. Victory was not even an option because the duel was planned to be unfair, and it would have taken 5 tails for this creature from the beginning, Seolhwa said. The more Seolhwa uses tails, the stronger the enemy will be, and Shivu asks her how many tails it would take for him to use them. 2 would not be enough, and 3 would be difficult. But if I had to finish quickly, I would use 4, answered Seolhwa. Each new tail increases the strength of the monsters by 1.5 times, but Seolhwa can handle most monsters with just 1 tail. Hearing something, Seolhwa turned around and asked not to watch their shadows like an eager mouse. Hungryun came out of the bushes and said she was afraid to interfere. She swore that she wasn't plotting anything bad, but was just watching. Sivu was surprised at Hungryun's appearance and said she was from the House of Humility Cultivation. Last time, Hungryun made a pact with their leader, and as a down payment for that pact, she came to hand over the things prepared by the leader. It was the best monster treasures or clothes for Master Sivu, and he was shocked to hear it. When Sivu was still in the Humility Cultivation House, he and his master talked. Mr. wanted to help Sivu become a leader in the arena as soon as possible. The material aid is just the beginning. The master offered Siv extraordinary things that the house guests were unaware of. In addition, there will be various amenities, such as help with information, that will reach Sivu. Sure, that sounded great, but Siva asked if that meant it was a calculation, and the leader would get more than he put in. But the gentleman assured Siva that they didn't want until they wanted nothing from him in return. Of course, this could not be called an investment, and at the bottom, the gentleman had nothing to say. They were complimented that they were honest and that Sivu was not the only candidate they invested in, and it's not just the two parties that do that. A king is a person who will rule a kingdom for the next 666 years, and relationships with him will affect the fate of entire groups. And those who are not strong enough to become the king of monsters at least want to be his loyal followers. Everyone tries to pick the most promising candidates, even if it's said to be in a stretch. It's like planting seeds for the future. And now that Sivu heard everything became much clearer. Aren't there monsters that are unhappy with such a trick? Sivu asked. Doesn't anyone wonder why they don't help him or someone else? The gentleman replied that there are some. There are no problems with them. For example, the youngest of Haitai's family, with whom Sivu had a conflict, also had to get sponsorship. The house deemed the divine beast's potential and power enough to invest in it, but one guest contacted them directly and said that the younger Haitai was not worthy of resources. Moreover, convinced that it is better to give resources to you, Sivu noted leader. If you want to invest in yourself or increase your money, you must show that you deserve it or defeat someone you don't like. As the competition progresses, those without support will be eliminated, and only those with the best chance of becoming king of the monsters will remain. When that moment comes, the terms of the investment are discussed. But now, the leader said, whether to agree to the deal or not is a personal choice. Until then, the leader had asked that it be considered a normal favor, and Sivu wondered whether it was worth accepting the help. Surprisingly, said Sivu, although he pulled it right over his clothes, it was very comfortable and the fit was perfect. Elven silk is common, said Seolwa, and one can summon it when needed from the storage space. Hanrian confirmed and said that a gesture seal like this has already been created. You just have to say, put it on or take it off. When Sivu said to take off his clothes, it was as if they were torn into tiny shreds and vaporized. While Seolwa and Hongrian were watching this, Shiwu was like a little kid dabbling and having fun with the costume. Hongrian thought that Seolwa was a nine-tailed fox who, despite the attempts of the house or many other factions, was a genius and refused to invest. Looking at Hongrian Seolwa, she asked what else she needed. If she gave everything away, then she should just leave because there was no reason to stand here anymore. But Sivu asked if there was anything else to pass on to him, and what the gentleman had said. Hanrian began to say that there were those who survived the hunt last night, and they knew the location of one such group. The Lord wanted to pass this information on to Siv and offer his help in mopping them up. Seolwa understood why she was telling Shivu about it, but asked how they knew about it. It was best not to lie. Mr. Shivu remembers Mr. Yusoma from yesterday, said Hongrian. Last night, Yusum participated in the hunt and stationed himself in the back of Seoul with two other creatures. Sivu asked if they were injured. Also, I asked if Yusum had reported the location of the remnants, and Hanrian said that instead of getting a report from them. Last night, it was learned that Mr. Yusum's partners were killed by those they were hunting, and Yusum was able to escape alone. And Seolwa said she hadn't heard that they couldn't destroy anyone. They only found out about it in the morning because Mr. Yusum had come to them late at night, and despite his wounds, he was panicking a lot, so they brought him inside. But he never recovered from his wounds, all the time repeating in fragments the events of the previous night about fear of the enemy and guilt for the failed mission. He's sitting in his room shivering and crying because the shock of 2 accidents in a row seems to have struck him. Yusome will have a bleak future, said Seolhwa. He didn't even lose the battle but ran away shamefully alone and will humiliate the whole clan now. Sivu asked if anyone else knew about it, and that the judge should know. The judge most likely already knows about it or will soon know about it, but no one will do anything about it. Last night was much busier than expected, Hua said. The hunt is not over at one site, and the plan is to merge. First, there are some things to check, and it seems Seolmi is suffering the consequences because she's a bit inexperienced in using the skills she's learned. Seolwa sent Shivu to check on her so she wouldn't worry, but Shivu didn't know it was possible. Master Mantai would probably tell Seolmi or her father not to tell them, but that's what Slihua thought. Now, the decision is not necessary because they know where this monster is now, and if you go to catch him and report back, there will be no problem. More importantly, aren't you worried right now? Seolwa turned to Shivu and said, if we capture at least one of them, we'll save a few people. If it were Shivu, Seolwa would go and won't stop him, so she said, as you see, the enemy determines his type. If the chip is in physical strength, everything will be fine. If it is in magic, be ready and fight accordingly. Saying that it all depends on Shiwu using magic flew away, leaving Shiwu with Hongrian. Siva asked Hanrian to recount everything Mr. Yusum said word for word. At the hotel where Kira and Nunu were staying, the girl was going somewhere, and her brother asked where his sister was going. Nuna said she was going sightseeing. Obviously, she didn't come here to stay in a hotel. But Kiru said she understood what he meant because she does not honestly care about the sights. Kira said they've already discussed it because they're guests. And this isn't Japan, and there are rules and customs they don't have. I also said they don't want to help them even if we cooperate properly, and I asked her what she thought. Nuna approached her brother and said she wouldn't go monster hunting in a foreign territory where she didn't even know the streets. Anne said that Kira was pretending to be a temporary leader and needed to behave accordingly and concentrate on the main job. Pointing her finger at Kira, Nuna said he was the reason they were in trouble with the Sumida family. When she left, she said she'd be back tonight, and if he was worried, he could call her or something and go. But Kira knew that even if he called his sister, she still wouldn't answer like always. When Nuna was going down in the elevator, she thought she couldn't actively interfere, and if the monsters wanted to find her, then so be it. Using magic, she summoned a creature that looked like a little man with a box, said she needed luck, and asked if he could do the deed. Nuna Yuzuru is a Shikigami shaman who can control various spiritual beings. The creature responded that it was possible, given how much had been collected. Nuna replied that there are 7 kinds of luck: wealth, health, love, business, study, family, and society. The shaman couldn't choose which one smiled at him, but she thanked him and took the role from the creature. The 7 lucky children automatically give the luck they think best suits the shaman. Thought it was a shame to use such a lucky toss, but it will help you grab and deal with the monster without any problems. Opening the scroll, read that she will meet her dream matchmaker on this day. The process can be extreme, and the color of luck is black. Screaming all over the street so that passers-by turned around, Nuna said that if anything went wrong, she'd need good luck. At that moment, a cab pulled up with Sivu in it and asked him to stop and walk because it was close. Nuna turned to look at Siva and froze as if she had seen a ghost. Sivu got out of the cab and said he would have taken the bus if he'd known it would turn out this way. In the park near the Han River, where people were walking, Bichon sat on a bench and Chen came over to ask if he was having fun. She said he didn't like people, and Baihyun asked how long she'd been here. Chen replied that it was only a few minutes and that he did not want to disturb him. He added that the sudden appearance interested him. And Baihyun said that you don't have to like to follow someone because most people don't like insects, but it's fun to watch them. He's also interested in watching people dig around and said Chen is still young. She said that Chen didn't celebrate her 2nd birthday, and given how fast she learns, she'll realize it soon enough. Chen said that certain things can be understood after the tone is over, and asked if that trio was gone. Baihyun said the older 2, Ray and Bi Ran, are definitely dead, and the younger Wei Ram can also be considered dead because their enemy was strong enough. And since she's been captured, they'll do everything they can to get Wei Ran to talk about us, even though she can't say much. Last night, Chen regretted what had happened until she turned Ray down. Everything was going well, and it came to her when she left the store. She looked at them and what she had done, and asked if it was stupid since she had spent almost a year with them, and only realized now. That these 3 were to be swallowed up, said Chen, and the more she thought about it, the angrier she got. People in the park noticed it was cold, and something had changed dramatically. Chen continued to say that she ate everything she could get her hands on but never satisfied her hunger. She ate everyone in the building she was hunting in with that trio and asked if she could. But Baihyun said that no matter if you can or can't, there's no point in hiding anymore. After last night, the inhibitions disappeared. There will be consequences wherever you go and whatever Chen does, but Baihyun isn't going to interfere with her, especially since he has no right to do so. So Baihyun lets her go and have fun, and that's all he asks of each of their 7. All the residents of the apartment complex are missing, and this news will spread by lunchtime, said Baihyun. And Chen asked him how he knew who was alive and who was gone. Was Baihyun really there? Baihyun replied that he was there by chance, not that he cared about Chen or the 3 of them, but just by chance. He had been watching things since he was around, but he didn't see anything important, at least not yet. On the street, Nuna was walking behind Siva and thought of the aura from him, as if he wasn't trying to hide. Considering recent events, that's silly. Either he's being controlled by magic or a supernatural entity, or he can't control his aura. Sivu purposely showed his ineptitude to lure out some monster. Pulled out the engraved sword. It was Master Yusum's blade, and the magic infused into it would help track a target from a distance if thrown at him. The broken part of the blade was in the monster that Yusum was chasing, and when Hanryun was giving him the poison, he asked if there was a time limit. Hanryun said that the effect works for about 1,000 kilometers, or until the target reaches the blade. But there are special conditions. The only way to get it out is with a stronger aura than the person who put it in you, and that's the only way to get the blade shard out. Remembering Hanrian's words that when it was taken out, the missing part would grow out of the hilt, and that the monster with the wreckage didn't get the blade since the sword was still broken. There is only one explanation for the enemy deliberately not pulling the blade out of himself. In some somewhat abandoned neighborhood, a mummy-like monster named Zen turned to another named Tao and asked him what was on his hand. Tao replied that everything was fine. The wound wasn't big, and he didn't intend to pull the blade out because that's how new ones would come to him. A third monster named Hufen said that Tao would attract those after them by doing so. Hufen said they could continue to feed on humans, but Tao said he would no longer feed on them. For some reason, no matter how much Tao ate, he couldn't satisfy his hunger, but there was no apparent reason. However, everything became clear last night, and the trio they faced was strong. Defeating them was the first time Tao felt something. I felt full, and whoever welcomed Tao here must have understood what he was saying and thought he was born for this feeling. Tao wanted to hunt those worthy of defeat not just for the sake of taste, and since this feeling people can't give, it's not worth consuming from. Hufen said they have a great chance, and he doesn't want to get in trouble for Tao's vagaries. Maybe so, Tao said, which meant it was over between them. It was a shame, but it was for the best. He held out his hand and wished them luck. Although they had not known each other long, Tao had learned a lot from them, and if it wasn't for them, he would have died. It would be nice to keep moving together, but Tao said it would be better if everyone went their separate ways. Turning to Zen, Hufen said they needed to leave before sunset, but he replied that he wanted to stay with Tao. After all, they survived last night thanks to Tao. Besides, Zen wants to be as strong as he is and doesn't want to fight humans. But pissed off, Hufen was almost shouting, saying that he had forgotten who they were originally because their bodies were not transformed the same way, and Tao was a dirty copycat. Tao said it was dangerous to be with him, especially for Zen, and Zen would probably die if he were with him. But as long as Zen is with him, Tao promises that if Zen dies, it won't be before he dies. Hufen said to do stupid things with the two of them, and if they don't consume the people downstairs, he'll eat them and leave. Agreeing with Hufen, Tao said he had to eat enough before sunset and froze as if he sensed something. At this time, Sivu approached an abandoned building, which was likely just where Tao and Zen were. Jen asked if Tao was okay, but he was fine. Tao was just a little surprised. Tao knew they were coming for him, but he thought it would be after sundown. He said to get ready to meet the guests. Tao was a monster that had an uncontrollable thirst for conflict, and this era in which he rampaged the most, and called Chiyu the violence that devoured the world. When Sivu walked into the building, there were two different sensations, two different directions, aura from above and a bloody stench from below. Sivu made his decision in this grim dilemma of quantum superposition choices. As it turned out, Nuna had been following Siva and came to the house and stood there thinking it was some sort of monster canteen. I thought Sivu couldn't help but feel it when he went inside, but for some reason, he did so without a second thought. It's a 99.9% trap, an utter folly given the probabilities. However, the predictions of the 7 lucky children don't lie. Even if it is a prediction about love, it guarantees that this day will be happy, and whatever it is, Nuna will meet her soulmate in wholeness. Nuna didn't notice any special traits in Sivu. He wasn't ugly or handsome. Anyway, she could feel the energy from above, said the forward beast at Nuna's back. A big furry monster that looked pretty cute appeared behind her back. They jumped through the window and landed in front of Zen's monster, and Nuna said she was being extra cautious. And looking at Zen said he didn't look like a dangerous monster, but Zen was saying to himself that he could. Nuna thought we'd have to catch everyone who got in the way. Sivu was coming down the stairs and saw Hufen eating human flesh. Getting closer, Siva asked how many people were there, but the question was pointless. Hufen said there was no point in asking about it, and because of Sivu, he couldn't finish his stash in peace and would have to answer for it. With the words, "Make if you can," Sivu rushed at Hufen and dealt him a crushing blow so fast that the latter didn't have time to consider the fact that Sivu was very fast. Sivu repeated his question about the number of monsters and each monster's ability as he approached the lying Hufen. Instead of arms, Hufen had claws like a crab, only with more spikes and huge, and with words that should have destroyed him while Sivu was close, sliced almost all of his flesh. For some reason, everyone comes boldly to him without understanding why he was called that and thinks that hitting from a distance is necessary for the attack to work. He continued to throw the same blows and took a few steps back, but he couldn't believe Sivu was still on his feet. Sivu understood why Hyphen absorbed people to become stronger, but it was strange to absorb so many people for a tiny increase in strength. Destroying people for such a small thing is beyond Sivu's comprehension, and he struck hard. Hyphen said they absorb people because they can, and there's nothing wrong with the strong absorbing the weak. He added that he's funny. Hearing this, Sivu finished him off after ripping out the pearl with his magic and absorbing it. Nuna was trying to find out from Zen if he was really alone, and if he had a boss or other allies at this time. Zen told her he didn't know and asked her to stop threatening and poking him. After hitting Zen with magic, Nuna thought he was at a medium level, but even so, it was clear that Zen couldn't fight, so Nuna thought of just grabbing him. Tao showed up and said that Zen's infusion was wrong, and that if he continued like this, he wouldn't be considered a worthy foe. Due to the unique nature of the Japanese archipelago, psychic abilities are used much more frequently in this region than in others. Nuna Yuzuru is an exorcist who has exorcised over 100 spirits since she was 14 years old by Korean standards in 5 years. However, such an experience took Nuna by surprise. Despite her experience, among all the spirits she had exorcised, not one would compare to Tao. As they approached, Tao said that even if the enemy was stronger, it was important to show that you wouldn't go easy on them. Looking at Tao, Noon thought that his energy was bursting over the edge, and he was not the one they were looking for, but his dark energy was powerful. The energy was at a poltergeist level, and Tao said he didn't want to cheat, but owed his colleague a chance because he really wanted to. Nuna realized the odds were the same whether she ran or stayed in the fight. Before he could speak, Sivu suddenly grabbed Tao's arm and threw a punch, and they began to fight. When the opponent was almost broken, Sivu turned to Nuna and told her to leave, as she had nothing to do there. Nuna interrupted him and suggested that Sivu come here to get rid of the monsters, but Tao interrupted her and said that this behavior upset him. Sivu was standing in his way, and he couldn't act freely. Tao also said that he realized at first sight that Sivu was different from him and looked like a friend he wanted to fight with. Then Nuna intervened and said that some worthless email said things like, "How dare you talk to me like that?" Taking out a vial of Beggar's Alliance magic, the roaring thunder, Nuna said that Siv had better stand back and would not control her power to not hurt him. And when she struck, she thought she wouldn't fight at half strength because he was her enemy. And she will go all out, unleash all the power she can, and strike again so that the whole building is engulfed in her magic. Standing already after Nuna thought something was going wrong as just Ambassador 2 blows, she was already without strength. Still, it was not even half as good as her. Immediately, Nuna realized that the cause was the energy, because it didn't match her country's energy. At that moment, Sivu grabbed her arm. He pulled her to him to dodge the blow Tao wanted to throw at them. When they turned around, Tao was gone, and Nuna asked if he had escaped, but Sivu said he hadn't, and it was probably the other way around. If Tao had wanted to, he would have freed himself long ago. Looking at his hand, he realized that there was a trace of magic left that would allow him to find it. Looking at Zen, Sivu said he seemed entirely unaccustomed to fighting, so Sivu defended himself and forgot about him during Tao's attack. He thought the other one would return soon, so he wanted to tell Sivu to follow him. Turning to Nuna, Sivu said he didn't need his help and already had a couple to go, but Nuna was against it. Sivu said she didn't realize how things really are and showed who he really is. Grabbing Nuna by the throat, he said he had never harmed a human being, and even after one touch, he could tell for sure. It's worth it for Siv to put in a little more effort. Nuna's neck will break, and she'll leave this world if she doesn't do something right now. But when he heard some sound, he turned around and saw a small, furry monster that had become small and was lying on the floor, moaning in pain. Immediately, he let go of Nunan's neck and apologized for his behavior, but he said he hadn't crossed the line. He also said he wasn't sure if she knew it, but the attack was meant for him, and Nuna wouldn't have been able to dodge it. And Sivu knew he had to save her, so he played this attack to delay her and buy her some time. And not knowing if it was pride or something else, Nuna realized it was right because now her strength would not be enough to defeat that Akai. And it's better that they just leave with the little monster because he doesn't want to see more people die today. Leaving asked to clean up the basement of the building and needed to take care of human remains. So Sivu asked her for a favor because you can't leave them like this. You have to give them to the earth humanly. And Sivu left. Sivu followed Tao in the footsteps of his magic, and as he entered the neighborhood, he heard that Tao was glad Sivu had come after all. Standing in front of Sivu Tao, he said that they could have fought back there, but this way he could keep his promise to his comrades and not have to worry about involving people. This area will be demolished, so very few people will live here, but even those who stayed have recently left due to certain rumors. Tao asked him to forgive the long explanation and said he was very excited, and the battle began. They were not inferior to each other in power and strength, and at first glance, it seemed extremely tense. However, as they competed in strength, the difference in technique became more apparent. Tao is a monster who is perfectly aware of his nature and his here truly stunning, so to speak, perfect compatibility. Sivu suddenly remembered the conversation with Xiaolhua. She said that over-increasing energy was just as dangerous as exhaustion, and one could turn into a monster. Tao said Sivu was strong. Even the three he fought last night weren't strong and fast enough. Also, Tao said it was the first time he had put in so much effort, and Sivu had eaten an energy pill. Sivu had a goblin cap on his head, the third ability the goblin race possessed. Somewhere in a tree, one of the men told his companions that he had seen a goblin with his own eyes. But they didn't believe it, because when he saw the cat, he told everyone it was a tiger, but he insisted it was true. He said that day he was crossing a mountain range and saw a snake-like creature, but then a goblin showed up and saved him. One asked how he knew he was the goblin. He didn't introduce himself or describe what the goblin looked like. He replied that the goblin was giant, almost twice as tall as him, but slightly different from a normal human being. The other suggested it was more likely to be a man because he thought goblins had horns on their foreheads. But the narrator said there were no horns, and he had not heard that goblins had horns in general, so he did not believe. When he was a little boy, he saw two goblins fighting, but it wasn't a fight. They just looked at each other and then disappeared. But one of the bottoms had something sharp like kin sticking out, and as soon as he noticed it, the goblins disappeared. As soon as the goblins disappeared, the ground beneath their feet began to split, and the roots ripped trees out. Apparently, they had fought and remained unseen. Legends and myths about the yokai were most often based on real life. However, this interpretation is based on human speculation. So the truth may turn out to be quite different, for example, goblin horns, which may or may not exist. A ghostly battle mask, better known as a goblin mask, is an element of defense created from goblin energy. The claim that you can't see the masked goblin is only partially true. Their movements become so fast that most people don't see them. Sivu instinctively realized how to use the mask on his face. Unlike the others, he severely lacked practical experience. The mask is a kind of tool that expands his limit, and as a result, he has greatly increased the power that he can harness. Sivu thought that as he became a goblin, he felt the pain in his muscles, and the speed at which energy was expended was 3 times more than usual. Sivu wouldn't last long in that state, and Tao said that all the time wouldn't even compare to a couple of minutes of their aching, and just then he realized how strong and tough Tao could be and what he was capable of, and his arms became strong and as if they were iron. This was his unique magic iron deity, and Tao thanked Siva for their meeting. Sivu swallowed the black pill and told Tao to go to hell or wherever he came from. Tao replied that living is insanely fun, even if it means imminent doom, and even more so now, and swarmed to attack. The battle was crushing, and they fought at almost the same level, but goblins could not only evolve during the battle. Tao didn't expect this, but used the unique mystic wind magic of the past winters and began to attack further with a smile on his face. A battle of indomitable monsters, and to break such an enemy, you need so much power that will surpass the level of the enemy head-on. They realized it at the same time, and Tao created the Windlord's spear, and Sivu made the sharpest sword, and sliced Tao in half. He only had time to say that Sivu's weapon was much better. Sivu stood without one arm and heard someone tell him that the ghostly goblin mask was amazing. And goblin wrestling for a normal goblin is pretty impressive, and it's crazy to meet Sivu. It was Bihyun. After introducing himself, Bihyun extended his hand to Shiv to say hello and told him they were the same. Said there was no need to worry, and Bihyun wasn't going to interfere in the fight with Tao. Shivu thought his words about them were the same, and wondered whether he meant Bihyun was already in a different place. Turning to Tao, Bihyun said that he looked quite happy, and if there had been more time to master magic, the outcome of the battle would have been different. He said it was okay and he'd get it right next time, but Sivu said there wouldn't be a next time from behind and wanted to strike. Standing on the cracked asphalt, withstanding the blow, Bihyun said that he felt the impact even with a perfect block from behind the horn. Grabbing the weapon, Sivu said it had a pretty strong horn and that he could lose his sight if he made a mistake. At that moment, Sivu clearly felt the same thing his opponents felt when they struck him. Blocking a full-force strike is just a matter of pure strength, a completed form of a technique that Sivu had awakened not too long ago. With a smile, Bi-hyun said that further proof was no longer necessary and that he was glad Sivu understood everything. Bi-hyun went on to say that Sivu was lied to and was the only remaining goblin in the world, but it wasn't true. Responding, Siv said he wasn't surprised and didn't care if Bi-hyun was a goblin or anyone else. Siv was just curious if he had welcomed all these monsters from other countries to come here to hunt humans. Bi-hyun admitted that everything he does, from recruiting to absorbing people and providing various hiding places and information, is his. He asked if Shiv was curious about what he was doing it for, and Bi-hyun said he'd tell him no problem, there's no point in hiding it. They were the same species, so Bi-hyun thought it would be exciting to talk to Siwoo. While Bi-hyun was finishing his words, Shivu tried to attack but failed, and Bi-hyun dodged the attack. And gave a tip for Sivu that when facing a much stronger opponent, you should make sure at least 1 foot touches the ground. Even though few goblins of the genus are considered absolute cheater magic, as long as you stand on your feet, you are entirely unafraid of most attacks. Even strikes from the other side agreed with Bi-hyun and struck Shiv, so he flew quite far away and hit the wall several times. And he said it's fantastic that you can take a full-powered punch without using supernatural strength. Surprisingly, without any training, Bi-hyun had mastered almost all of the goblin's abilities and asked Sivu if he liked dogs. In answering this question, he said that dogs are excellent and, in many aspects, superior to humans, but sometimes they can be annoying. For example, a dog brought up by a weak-minded owner rolls his teeth without realizing the situation and sometimes bites people. But then it's the owner who's to blame. But sometimes these pathetic creatures can be incredibly annoying. Beings that exist to satisfy the needs of a superior race and can only live by being cared for and cared for. As soon as the realization comes, they are no longer lovable. Rising from his knees, Sivu said he was crazy about releasing monsters to devour people for such a reason, but Bi-hyun noted a misunderstanding. That he doesn't like people, but he despises not only those who don't understand anything. When the kings of the yokai did not exist, and there was no need for it, there were no rules and laws among them. Power ruled all, and the only things that mattered were the strong and weak food chain and the position determined by power. Both humans and yokai, if their strength was insufficient, were nothing more than prey for the stronger ones. For Bi-hyun, it even sounded interesting. Countless yokai eagerly await the 6 months to expire to catch and consume humans again. Initially, most of these creatures were not much different from humans. They were the prey protected for much longer. They can only bark at the weaker ones as if they were predators. Still, they have lived under protection much longer than humans. Beings of the same species as us, which are disgusting to look at, think that humans are just like us, continued Bi-hyun. Parasites that get much more than they are worth, under the protection of laws and various organizations, and, without shame, commit acts and are unable to take responsibility. As if it were an inalienable right, they lived in the hope of protection and imagined that protection no longer existed. No law or right allows such parasites to exist. The only criterion is force. And those who can't answer for their actions will either die or be tolerated. Shiwoo said that it all sounds like an 8th grader's fantasy. Still, Bi-hyun said that this reaction is normal because values are different. That's why Bi-hyun decided to make them look alike. And ever since Shiwoo defeated Tao, he's been interested in having Shiwoo join him. He promised to tell him all that goblins are capable of and need to know and what the world owes them. But Sivu has been asked not to talk about this nonsense anymore and doesn't want to join Bi-hyun or anyone else. Smiling, Bi-hyun said that in-E is fine, but it is not a case where there is a right to choose. He added that there was no need to worry, and by now, he should have realized that resisting at that moment was pointless. Nuna landed at their side and used a lightning trap that aims not to damage but to shackle the enemy. And then Sivu struck. Regeneration is slowed down when the entire nervous system is focused on one thing. On forming your own goblin baton, an incredible and limitless transformation. What exactly provoked such a change, and the principle responsible for the formation of the force, is practically unknown. However, one thing is sure about the emotions felt at this moment and in the past term used to create the baton. In essence, it means a weapon that can become anything, or more accurately, it can be described as a weapon that takes the form desired by its owner. Using this ability, Sivu could use various forms to suit a particular situation. What he's doing is just a tool that comes in handy at this point, but now there's a fierce desire to achieve the goal added to it. Yokai consumes people and people who have already been consumed, and it is no longer possible to prevent this terrible catastrophe. But since that's the case, you can't miss the target right in front of your eyes. And saying that he would not miss again, Sivu prepared to attack, and for the first time, put all his determination and emotion into the baton. Imbued with the master's will is the true nature of the goblin baton, and Sivu demonstrated spirit-level power. Nuna thought that she had never met such power before, and in a moment, Sivu ran up to her and asked her to duck and strike a blow. But standing in front of them almost without a scratch, Baehyun said that Sivu never ceased to amaze him. It's not instinct, but a conscious desire to reveal his true nature. At Sivu's age, Baehyun was incapable of such a thing. Also, Baehyun said that Sivu had finally controlled his lust for destruction and asked how it felt. However, it is essential that Sivu did not destroy anyone during the first manifestation of his essence. For the first time, the manifestation of nature must reach its goal. He struck Siv with a blow that broke his weapon, and he collapsed to the ground like a sack of potatoes. The baton's point is that the shape it takes depends on the owner's wishes. Now, the baton is designed for the moment of destruction, and trying to defend yourself with it will not work at all. But it would have been better if Sivu had prepared for the punch from the start instead of trying to hit back. Baehyun stood next to Nuna, asking if he had correctly realized she was not from this country and should have learned about this place first. Said he wanted to wring Nuna's neck right now, but he might let her go if Sivu threw away what he was holding right now. Sivu held a black pill in his hands, and Baehyun held Nuna by the neck, saying that it wasn't bad and had an extremely positive effect on Sivu. However, the point of medicine is that there are positives and negatives, and Baehyun assumed it was the second pill. A sudden burst of energy overloads the energy center, causing it to become 3 times as much. What happens in the worst case? No one knows. But even if nothing happens, you can still do nothing about it, said Baehyun. And he asked me to sit quietly on the sidelines because he didn't want to hurt Siv anymore. Nuna asked not to listen to him and was prepared to pass away during an exorcism because it was her job, and she was always prepared for it. At the moment when Baehyun asked her to shut up, someone struck her with a blow, separating her arm, and Nuna freed herself from him. Yu-yeon and Goy-yu came to the battle site. While Yu-yeon fought Baehyun Goy-yu, he told Shiv that he had done more than was required and asked him to stay put. He warned that the result would be irreversible if he used the energy in that state. Sivu asked how they got there, and Goy-yu said the destruction was too severe even though no one was on the site. When Baehyun and Yu-young fought, Yu-young tried on pure autumn water magic and said that you have to land in such a way with such an opponent. Yu-yeon represents the Seiji clan's main shrine, and the clan's unique magic involves changing the shape and nature of the surrounding water. And the closer it is, the more effective it is, especially evident in pure water. Thus, most applications involve groundwater and steam attacks. Baehyun realized that this magic was heating the blood in his veins, and given the history of the clan, not many people would be able to repeat such a thing. And what Yu-yeon shot was a drop of water. Considering the material, the effectiveness wasn't that high, said Baehyun. But regardless of race, everyone has their own advantages, Yu-young replied to him. But an attack was already aimed at him. Goy-yu said that Shivu and he had encountered this magic before because it was Seiji's magic. When Sivu heard the last name, he realized where he could experience Seiji's magic on himself. However, the effectiveness of his magic on another level is like heaven and earth. Even if it's the same attack where you shoot water droplets where you can pound away all you want compared to that. Goy-yu said that among the same species of yokai, their abilities differ significantly because of their innate talent and the effort each one puts into honing it, as well as the precepts that guide them. However, in all aspects, this guy is superior to everyone in the Seiji clan. Looking at Baehyun, Yu-young thought that even under the influence of magic, Baehyun is able to move. This regeneration and adaptability surpass common sense. As always, with a smile, Baehyun said he expected more because he was just starting to warm up. Turning to Goy, Yu-yeon said that they would have to put their best foot forward and should take care of any possible repercussions. Yu-young had gathered all his power and was ready to attack. Baehyun realized he had gathered all the water here because it had become scorched. A huge monster made of water taller than even a 10-story building appeared, and Yu-young called it Ishimi and ordered it to take Baehyun. Nuna and Sivu stood in complete shock at what they saw, and Sivu could only utter that it was too huge. Yu-young ordered Ishimi to attack, and the monster rushed into battle. An excited Baehyun looked at that monster and said it was magnificent. When Ishimi attacked Baehyun, there was a vast magical explosion, and everyone started to close in. Goy-yu blocked everything from such a blow, and Sivu immediately covered Nuna with himself. Still, of course, she didn't expect such a thing. And when the magic from the blow had almost dissipated, a giant double pit was left in the vengeance of the attack. Seiji and the Black Turtle are supernatural beings whose essence lies in the water. Their synergy does no good when they are side by side because the two spells manipulate water differently. It was not the best time for such combinations, and the synergy effect was not too good. The enemy could show its full power in broad daylight, and the best outcome would be cooperation. They were the only people in the neighborhood, and when the block made by Goy Yu began to fall down, he asked how Yu Young was. "It's okay," Yu Young replied, "but you just need to catch your breath because it's hard to release all your power after so long." But Yu Young couldn't say for sure whether or not it had a significant result. There are two possibilities. Either Yu Young overestimated his opponent, or he had no intention of continuing the fight, he said. The latter is most likely, and most likely Yu Yan did not critically injure him. "He thinks it was known that he would meet Goy Yu," said Yu Yan. Goy Yu said that even after such a blow that did not cause significant damage, it was hard to tell if they would mess with me. Looking at Siva with a drop of water, Yu Yan knocked him down and he flew a few meters away. Nuna started yelling that they were on the same side and that you couldn't attack Siva out of the blue. But after correcting his glasses, Yu Young said there was no need to worry. He did what he had to do, and now Shiwu will be back to normal. "No more factors posing a threat to the surrounding area," said Yu Young. "From now on, they will handle this business, and people will not have to interfere with it." Tao was sitting on the roof of that department store, and Chen came up to him and said he was also a dark god like him. But it feels different because it's from a different species and slightly different from what she expected. But for Chen, it didn't matter. She said that it would be even tastier and wanted to devour Tao already. But Chen stopped Bihyun, asked him to wait, and said that they didn't know what would happen in the future, so they should take a friendlier approach. "It's not bad that you and Tao can absorb each other," said Bihyun, "but there is hope that both will grow up and do the right thing." Chen turned around and asked why he was still alive. Bihyun replied that he wasn't easy to defeat, but that sounded too much. However, at some point, Bihyun said that it seemed possible that the kid knew my strengths and weaknesses perfectly well. Root spell that is used to redirect the attack into the ground. In other words, the magic does not work to its full potential if the ground under your feet is unstable. So before getting all the water out of the ground, Yu Yong changed the terrain so that Bihyun couldn't completely redirect the strike. At this point, Chen thought she would mean it when she decided to devour it, and Bihyun added that it was delicious. Facing a creature that even humans couldn't tame is even more amazing than the Seiji that lived 1,000 years ago. And if it were Bihyun's will, he would have enjoyed every last bit of it, but Chen said he could have done that. Though the desire to do so was great, the heavens seemed to be against it, said Bihyun. As soon as he said that, it started to rain, and Bihyun added that it looked like it would be an absolute downpour, even though it wasn't forecast to rain. Black Turtle and Seiji, and if Bihyun meets them on a rainy day, there's no guarantee he'll be unharmed. Even if Bihyun manages to win, it will affect more than just him. Given Chen's current condition, even a simple fight will be fatal. Then there's Tao, and maybe those kids had the same idea, but there's an opponent they'd rather not mess with. However, not taking Siva with me is sad, but there is nothing we can do about it, and there is still time. When Sivu opened his eyes, his first thought was where he was, and how his whole body ached so much that it was even hard to move. He didn't expect this. Yu Young walked into Siv's room and stared at his phone. When he got a call, he picked up the phone. The head called and asked how Yu Young's health was, and Yu Young replied that everything was fine and that he only had a few scratches. The head was worried because Yu Young had taken half a day off because he wasn't feeling well. Turning to Siv, he asked whether his body was okay or not. He said there were no serious injuries but would still be sore because he had overexerted himself. Sivu had awakened the mask spell not too long ago, and Yu Young didn't know for sure, but it was clearly not a spell that could be maintained for a long time. The spell is for a short-term increase in strength, which is why strength and physical stamina were drained throughout the duration of the effect. For this reason, Yu Young had to resort to forced deactivation because Sivu was confused. Therefore, he had to act as soon as possible and apologize profusely. Yu Young was not an evil being by nature, but he recognized his mistakes because they could not be justified by immaturity. Sivu said there was nothing to apologize for, and they thought there was simply no choice but what had happened to that yokai. He said he was also a goblin, and the magic was similar, but there should only be one goblin. Grandpa Babai appeared in the room and said he thought so too. But judging by all appearances, such judgment was erroneous, and along with apologies, Grandpa Babai thought it necessary to explain everything. Bihyun was a goblin prince who lived on this peninsula 1,000 years ago, and he may be an ancestor of Sivu. It was raining in the streets of the city, and Seolwa was walking around. She thought no one was walking around in this weather and sitting at home. Seolmi was thankful for the help, so much so that she talked to all the witnesses in the department store and couldn't have done it without Seolwa. If she didn't help, the situation could get out of control and Seolmi couldn't handle it. In response, Seolwa asked to hold back her thanks for Shiwoo, and she was okay with that and agreed because she didn't want to socialize with the guy. As they approached the cafe, they heard two girls talking to each other and discussing a certain guy. Many people here are actually people who came here to see Appa, but he doesn't realize it. When they went into the cafe, the bartender said they were closing early today, but then he looked at them and recognized them. Seolmi happily said she was ahead of him and asked why he had decided to close the cafe early. He replied that he wasn't originally supposed to work today, but needed to serve several customers, including theirs. While Seolmi was discussing the order with Appa, Seolwa walked over to the girl sitting at the table with the same hair as Rep and glared at her. The girl didn't like it. She asked why she was staring at her and wondered if she wanted to die. At one point, Seolmi started to comfort Seolwoo, saying that he's just a kid and not trying to make excuses for him. But in the yokai world, this little guy, whoever he is, shouldn't be so brazen. "Don't you know each other?" Seolmi asked, and Seolwa replied that where there is no tiger, the raccoon thinks he is in charge. The lad replied that there was a wild creature where he had disappeared, and one fox in particular was bothering him. Even among the yokai, the concept of natural enemies applies to those from the animal kingdom. The confrontation between the original individuals still has the same effect on the yokai even after their transformation. Of course, after becoming a yokai, the balance of power between the two may not be precisely the same. And the enmity has not disappeared, which affects the descendants who have the same blood. If such an atmosphere arose because of instinct, is this baby, thought Seolmi. She was told not to worry, and even if they made the first move, Appa wouldn't pounce on the first person she met. A furious Seolwa asked if she should call the judge since she was ready for it, and hadn't eaten properly since she came to this world. The guy said he's up for it and not interested in fox meat, but it won't take long. But then he was told no, and that he couldn't leave him even for a minute. Something would happen. A girl entered the cafe and said the judge had given her a rare opportunity to join the human world. Your reputation would suffer if you got into a fight on the first day. The guy said the fox looked at him first, and the judge said it was okay to call him out too, even when they shouldn't be fighting. Well, the young gentleman said, Volyan, in the business world, correctness of protocol alone is not enough, and the young lady he's arguing with. He is currently the most powerful member of his clan. He cannot argue because he's not even a tribe member. Ultimately, you will be responsible, and the young lady knows it. Seolwa said this is the most pathetic request for mercy, and it's not even awkward to defeat a lion cub who hasn't learned the taste of life. It was more of a provocation than a real threat. However, Seolwa, considering Seolwa's personality, and if he decided to attack or cower, she would devour him. Seolwa said that it's pretty old-fashioned, and it's not only Brian but also Changwi who raised the young tiger for centuries. Volyan said if you want this to continue, you'd better get a grip and not listen to Seolwa. Seolwa asked why you had to call us from Seolyamki and why they were here. Since this was a tea house, they didn't like the stench of burning wood. That was interesting, Volyan. After yesterday's hunt, they were told to lay low for a while, so something's up. Oppa said that the elder had issued a temporary license so that even unqualified yokai could participate in the exorcism if they were strong enough. All temporary license holders, except you have been ordered to return to the world of the yokai due to a lack of skills. Seolmi and Seolwa almost unanimously asked about Shiwoo, not realizing what was happening. Appa said it was different with him. One asked Seolmi why they didn't send him to the world of the yokai, or else this was getting out of hand. Agreeing, Seolwa said that Shivu is not weak enough to be beaten by the first person he meets. Strength isn't everything, but given his power, he isn't ready yet. The point is that a human, no matter how skilled in combat, is just a big prey. If Shivu is left alone in the world of the yokai, he will be eaten immediately. Turning around, Seolwa said she was taking off and would tell the elder that she was returning to the world of the yokai. She would train Shiva for another month and face trial. But no matter what Appa says, the choice is always yours. First, listen to the end because Sivu is still here. The decision to send him to the yokai world has not yet been made, but it is also closely related to our new goal because we need to protect him from humans. In the room, lying on the bed, Sivu asked Grandfather Babai if this creature was his ancestor, though he was pretty much the same, and asked how old Bihyun really was. If this goblin is Bihyun Liang, Grandpa Babai said he's about 1,500 years old. We confirmed that his name is indeed Bihyun Shiwu. I couldn't believe he lived so long. In this case, the story is slightly different, said Yu Yan, although it is true that the life expectancy of the yokai is longer than that of humans. On average, it is about 500 years. The power of the yokai themselves allows you to live beyond that. When they accumulate enough energy, they can increase their lifespan. At 1,500 years old, Baihyun looks like he hasn't lived 100 years. Not only that, but being an experienced fighter and using all of his power, Yu Yang could not teach him any significant lesson, so he successfully escaped. And no matter how much Yu Yan lacks skills, this pathetic pretense must stop now. I think there is a strong yokai, and it seems that Seolwa and Goi Yu are the best among the local youth right now. The last time the goblins hid traces of their existence was after the Great War. Over 1,000 years ago, the goblins split into two opposing sides, and the king of the time and his faction were defeated. They had to hide, but the victors also suffered severe losses, and they became fewer until only one was left. Bacon was the last goblin, and lived to see the second half of the allotted time, but even he died of his wounds, and from that point on, the goblins were considered extinct. That's why Grandpa Babai thought Sivu was his secret descendant. When Bacon left, it would have been over 100 years since he turned into a goblin. There is not even any direct evidence to identify Sivu's ancestors. He seems to be a descendant of Bacon, who was abandoned years ago. However, Bihyun, one of the infamous family members who died 1,000 years ago, came back. Sivu began to say that Bihyun and the other goblins could be their ancestors if they were alive. More importantly, a goblin with similar powers has been hiding for a reason. It doesn't matter whose blood runs in Sivu's veins, which is why he and his bloodline are only now being known. Grandfather Babai began to ask if Sivu's mother was a human being, and asked her to answer truthfully. Sivu remembered talking to his mom about her request not to harm other people, which was important to her. And after the request, he didn't resort to violence again until he became a monster. Sivu's father was a professional athlete but left the world due to a terminal illness shortly after Sivu's birth. Judging by his father's success in sports, Sivu thought he inherited goblin blood from him. My mom is an appraiser of ancient artifacts, and she's a regular person with no connection to the monster world. Otherwise, Sivu would have learned long ago that he was a monster, but Mom may have purposely not told about it, said Grandpa Babai. Given his sudden origin, if you compare Siva now to a couple of days ago, his life has changed like night and day. The rate of development in the last couple of days is simply phenomenal, and the growth is clearly beyond the talking points of Babai's cases. That's why Grandfather also began to suspect Siva's mother, whether you are really a half-monster or a tool so that Bihyun could participate in the festival. Even if Bihyun has something to do with Shivu, at least Grandpa Babai knows that Shivu is innocent. Yu Young came into the conversation and said that the shaman people see Shivu as a threat because he's related to Bihyun. Just today, mass disappearances from apartment complexes in downtown Seoul have occurred nationwide. 2 similar incidents have occurred in other areas of Seoul, and they have been covered in the news, with public opinion on the verge of panicking. As for the abductions last night, that's what the shamans were preparing to do in the neighborhoods. The shamans asked the country's leaders to assist in our task, and if they turned a blind eye, we would do anything to destroy the monsters. Looking into the news, Sivu said it wasn't just last night that interest in bed disappeared at the rate of wildfire. That's why Grandpa Babai said there were difficulties. Still, from the shaman's point of view, they have to expend effort to compensate for their incompetence. And what Sivu did today, although luckily no one was hurt, there were quite a few witnesses to the incident. The shamans are requesting a new person using this as an excuse, and most likely, they want to punish the monster that went berserk in the middle of the day. Lowering his head, Sivu said it was his own fault for going alone without permission. However, although Sivu acted against the judge's decree, his opponents were monsters that had devoured countless people, thus breaking the law. Even if you have to be punished, Grandpa Babai will assign it himself as a judge of monsters. It will not even be a punishment, but most likely just a reprimand. Although they are trying to force Sivu's extradition, they don't have to worry because Babai's grandfather will protect Sivu and his mother. The shamans know of Bihyun's existence and suspect you may be connected to him. And if she was the one who raised you, then the shamans probably passed judgment on her, Grandpa Babai said. Without even rushing to finish listening, Siva saw the window and decided in an instant he rushed to run through the window. But Grandfather Babai bound Siva with magic and said he couldn't let him go to her alone because that's what they wanted. He also said that he had sent someone for protection, so you cannot worry. It is best to stay here under our protection, said the grandfather. Yu Young said it was worth listening to the judge's words because considering the condition, there is no telling how it will end if you encounter the shamans. The magic-bound Sivu said it was his fault for forgetting to get permission and causing trouble for himself and said he was ready to be punished. However, Sivu was too dumb to think that his actions would hurt someone, and he didn't even realize it would be his mom. Sivu knew he was in trouble, but if something happened to Mom because of him, he would never forgive himself. Saying that, Sivu became angry and tore the magic cloth along with physical strength. Turning around, Sivu said that as soon as he saw with his own eyes that Mom was safe, he would come back, and he jumped out the window. With the two of them staying in the apartment, Grandfather Babai asked why Yu Young didn't do anything but just stand there and watch. And he asked me not to say he was so pathetic he couldn't even get a word in edgewise. Yu Young said there was just no water nearby to use, and if we blew up a fire hydrant, it would attract a lot of attention. You are so simple-minded, and that's why everyone says you're lagging behind your sister even though she lacks talent. However, that's the nature of your clan. But wasn't that rude to Shiwu? Yu Young asked. Although his potential was huge, the magic cloth didn't disperse because it was torn. It doesn't matter what Sivu does, the relationship will not change, and it's Grandpa Babai's fault that he didn't understand the situation. Besides, a grandfather isn't so callous as to ignore a child's desire to protect his mom.